Section 1. The town that time forgot. Settle in. Get comfortable wherever you are right now. If you have a blanket nearby, pull it a little closer. Dim the screen if you like. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow down to something that doesn't feel like it needs to accomplish anything in particular, and let your mind wander somewhere familiar. A cartoon town. Yellow sky. A river winding through it, slow and slightly wrong in a way you can't immediately identify. A nuclear plant sitting at the edge of things, its twin cooling towers breathing soft clouds into the air above the community below. A school where a 10-year-old boy has been causing trouble for longer than most of the people watching have been alive. A bar where the light is always dim and something is always going wrong, but nobody seems particularly troubled by it. A donut shop. A church. A retirement home that keeps getting damaged and rebuilt. A police station whose chief seems entirely unbothered by the extraordinary rate at which things go terribly wrong in his jurisdiction. And at the center of it all, on a street called Evergreen Terrace, a house. Number 742. Yellow, 2 stories. A car in the driveway that may or may not run depending on the episode. A family inside it. A father who works at the nuclear plant. A mother with an architecturally impossible hairstyle. A boy who rides a skateboard. A girl who plays saxophone. And a baby watching everything from her playpen with eyes that seem, if you look at them for a moment too long, to be taking in considerably more than a baby's eyes should. You know this place. You have always known it. Springfield. The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December 1989, a Sunday night. A family settled onto a couch, and America settled in to watch, and something began that has not stopped since. 36 seasons. 788 episodes as of this writing, with more coming. It is the longest-running American animated series in history. It is the longest-running scripted primetime show in the history of American television, a record so extreme that the show in second place is not even in the same conversation. It has been renewed so many times that the announcements of renewal have become their own recurring cultural event, as reliable as the seasons themselves. And in all that time, across all of those episodes, in every single story this show has ever told, something has never happened that happens in every other long-running story about human beings. Nobody has gotten older. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He was 10 years old when Ronald Reagan was still a recent memory, and the internet was a concept most people hadn't yet encountered. He is 10 years old now, in an era that would be entirely unrecognizable to the people who watched the first episode. He will be 10 years old if the show runs for another decade. His age is not a number. It is a permanent condition. Lisa is 8. She has been 8 for the entirety of her existence on screen. Within the logic of the show, she has won a saxophone competition, met presidents, saved the environment, fallen in and out of love, grappled with vegetarianism and Buddhism, and the particular loneliness of being the most intelligent person in every room she enters. And she is still 8. Maggie has been 1 year old since the day she was first drawn. She has been attached to a pacifier in the way some children are attached to security blankets, and she has been attached to it since before the audience watching her now was born. Homer and Marge are somewhere in their mid-30s, though the exact number slides depending on which flashback episode you're consulting, which decade their origin story has been most recently rewritten to occupy, and what mathematical demands the plot places on their biography. The year changes around them. The technology in the background of each episode updates. The cultural references are contemporary. Homer has a smartphone now. The world the Simpsons inhabit is recognizably the present world, updated in real time with each new season. But the people inside it do not age. They exist in a kind of permanent present tense, locked at the ages they occupied when the show began, while everything around them accelerates forward through time. Most people who watch The Simpsons have encountered this fact, registered it, and moved past it without dwelling on what it actually means. It is, after all, how animated television works. Characters don't age because aging would require writing an ending, and the commercial logic of a successful franchise is to avoid endings wherever possible. This is a practical reality of the television industry. Nobody argues with it. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the practical explanation has started to feel insufficient. When a show accumulates 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, when its characters have inhabited the same permanent present tense for longer than the majority of its current viewers have been alive, The frozen timeline stops feeling like a production convenience and starts feeling like something the show is actually doing, something intentional, something that, if you look at it alongside everything else that is strange and unresolved and quietly disturbing about Springfield, starts to look less like a cartoon convention and more like evidence. Evidence of what exactly is what this video is going to spend the next several hours working through. There is a version of Springfield that you get when you watch the show casually. The funny version. The yellow family with the catchphrases and the couch gag and the guest stars and the social satire. The version that has been part of the background of American culture for so long that it feels like furniture. Permanent, familiar, taken for granted. And then there is the version you get when you stop watching casually and start looking closely. When you begin pulling threads. When you ask why nobody ages and why nobody remembers the catastrophes of previous episodes and why the plant has had 342 safety violations and is still operating, and why the fish downstream from the plant have an extra eye, and why Burns has been alive for over a century, and who actually shot him, and what exactly Maggie is thinking behind that pacifier, and where Springfield is located on a map, and why nobody in the town can answer that question despite having lived their entire lives in it. When you start asking those questions, Springfield becomes a different place. Stranger, darker, more intricate, more interesting. That is the Springfield we are going to explore tonight. Every theory, every mystery, every buried storyline, every thread the show introduced and never picked up again, every detail hiding in plain sight behind 3.5 decades of jokes and callbacks, and the kind of familiarity that makes people stop seeing what is actually in front of them. We will do this slowly, because Springfield deserves the time. We are going to follow each thread to its end and then hold them all up together and see what picture they make. So let us start where everything in Springfield begins and ends, the floating timeline. Because the floating timeline is not just one mystery among many. It is the shape of the mystery. It is the architecture beneath everything else, the structural fact that every other theory is, in one way or another, an attempt to explain. Here is what the floating timeline means in practice, and why it matters more than it initially appears. When The Simpsons began in 1989, Homer and Marge had a specific, coherent biography. They were high school sweethearts in the early to mid-1970s. Their courtship was detailed, era-specific, anchored to a particular window of American cultural history. The music at their prom, the fashions of the era, the television shows in the background of their adolescent lives, all of it was consistent with people who were teenagers in the mid-1970s and parents in their mid-30s in 1989. The math worked. The backstory made sense. And then the years kept passing, and the characters did not age and the math stopped working. By the late 1990s, Homer and Marge being mid-1970s teenagers, while still appearing to be in their mid-30s, was already strained. By the 2010s, it had become logically impossible. A person in their mid-30s in 2015 was born around 1980. They were not a teenager during Watergate. Their formative cultural experiences were defined by the early 1990s at the earliest. And the show, quietly, without ceremony, without acknowledging what it was doing, began to reflect this. New flashback episodes shifted the couple's youth forward. Homer and Marge's high school years moved from the 1970s to the 1990s. Their musical touchstones updated, the backstory was rewritten, and then rewritten again. Homer and Marge's origin story has been told and substantially revised at least 4 or 5 times over the course of the show's run. Each version places their formative years in a different era, adjusting the specific details while keeping the emotional core that they met, they fell in love, they built a family intact. The love story is stable. The decade it happened in is not. What this means is that Homer Simpson does not have a single fixed memory of his own past. He has multiple versions of his past, each anchored to a different decade, each internally consistent within the episode that presents it, and in direct contradiction with several other episodes before and after. Homer's past is not a record. It is a revision in progress, being updated in real time to serve the needs of the present moment. Springfield is a town where the past changes and nobody blinks. Once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Events happen in Springfield and are forgotten. Disasters occur and leave no trace. Relationships develop, and then reset to their default state without explanation. The town collectively, continuously, and apparently effortlessly ignores the accumulation of its own experience. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this deliberately, thoughtfully, and with genuine emotional investment. The clearest example is the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, which takes the audience forward roughly 15 years to show Lisa in her early 20s, engaged to be married. The future depicted is detailed and specific and emotionally rich. Lisa is everything the show has always suggested she would become: brilliant, principled, slightly bruised by the gap between the world she imagined and the world she found. She is still playing saxophone. She is still asking questions nobody wants to answer. And then the episode ends, and she goes back to being 8 years old. The window opened and closed, the glimpse was offered and withdrawn. The future is sealed off again, and the permanent present resumes as if the vision never happened. The show can imagine the characters growing up. It refuses to allow it. This refusal is the heart of the floating timeline mystery. And the most interesting thing about it is not that the show keeps its characters young, but that it has built an entire mythology around Springfield that makes the characters' frozen state feel like more than a production choice. Every major theory about The Simpsons converges on this point, arriving from a completely different direction to reach the same conclusion. Time does not work in Springfield. The radiation theory says the characters don't age because nuclear contamination has fundamentally altered their biology, interfering with the cellular processes that normally govern aging. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of an unconscious man whose dreaming brain can only preserve the world as it was at the moment he lost consciousness, a perfect, static snapshot of everything he loved on the day he last saw it. The collective denial theory, derived from a specific episode we will discuss in detail later, says Springfield doesn't age because the town votes to ignore any truth that threatens its comfortable status quo, and time passing is the most fundamental truth of all. And Burns's immortality proves that in this universe, the concept of normal aging is already negotiable at the individual level. Different paths, same conclusion. Time is broken in Springfield. We are going to find out why. But first, an honest word about what this video is and is not. This is not an argument that The Simpsons is secretly a horror show or that the writers have been concealing a sinister conspiracy for 3 decades. Most of the people who made this show love it deeply, and the love is legible in the work. The Simpsons, at its best, is one of the most humane and attentive pieces of American storytelling ever produced. The theories and mysteries we are going to explore do not contradict that. They deepen it. Because when you look at Springfield through the lens of all of its accumulated strangeness, what you find is not darkness for darkness's sake. What you find is a story about how much we need certain things to stay the same, about how fiercely we protect the version of home we first loved even when we are very far from it, about how a family one imperfect, yellow, four-fingered, radiation-soaked family on a street that doesn't technically exist can become the thing an entire culture organizes its nostalgia around. That is worth taking seriously. That is worth the time. So settle in a little more. Springfield is waiting. It always is. Before we go further, drop a comment right now. What time is it where you're watching from, and where in the world are you? There is something genuinely lovely about knowing how many different places and hours are connected in this particular moment. And if you're enjoying this, please subscribe. There is a lot of ground still to cover. Section 2, The Poison Beneath Springfield. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits at the edge of town with the casual, unquestioned permanence of a mountain. It has always been there. Every character in Springfield has always known it was there. The cooling towers are visible from most of the town, a pair of concrete hourglass silhouettes that appear in the background of outdoor scenes, the way church steeples appear in the background of paintings of medieval villages. Ubiquitous. Accepted. Part of what Springfield is, so thoroughly woven into the visual identity of the place that most people have stopped seeing it, which is exactly what the theory says. The nuclear power plant is not a backdrop. It is the explanation for everything wrong with Springfield. It is the mechanism behind every mystery, the source of every strange thing that happens in this town. The reason the fish have 3 eyes and the children have 4 fingers, and the billionaire who owns the facility has been alive for somewhere between 100 and 140 years. The plant is not a setting detail. It is the entire story, and the show has been telling you this since season 2. Let's begin with what the show has actually established about this facility as documented fact within its own canon. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It provides electrical power to the entire town. It has been owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns since before any living character in the show was born. It is, by any reasonable measurement, one of the most dangerous industrial facilities in the history of fiction, and the show has earned this description through decades of accumulated evidence. A surprise safety inspection of the plant discovered 342 safety violations. This number deserves a moment of consideration. Not 3, not 17. Not a concerning but manageable number that suggests systemic problems requiring attention. 342 discrete violations of safety protocol, each one representing a specific way in which this facility fails to meet the minimum standards designed to prevent it from poisoning, irradiating, or killing the people around it. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code following this inspection was $56 million. Burns refused to pay it. This decision was not driven by financial constraint. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million represents an amount he could fund without meaningful impact on his personal wealth. He refused because paying meant acknowledging that the problems existed. And acknowledging that the problems existed meant someone might start asking what those problems had already done, not to the facility itself, but to the town surrounding it, to the water downstream, to the air near the cracked cooling towers, to the children of Springfield whose elementary school is visible from the plant's fence line. Burns looked at that question and decided it was better not to ask it. The violations themselves are worth examining individually, because the temptation is to absorb them as a single comic unit rather than to sit with what each item actually means. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into bodies of water, not near bodies of water. Not accidentally released in quantities regulatory agencies might describe as within acceptable limits, directly into the water supply that the people of Springfield and the wildlife of the surrounding environment depend on. Radioactive waste is also being dumped onto children's playgrounds, onto the physical spaces where Springfield's children spend their leisure time, with material that causes measurable biological damage, with complete awareness that the people doing the dumping know exactly what the material is. Plutonium is being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. This is played for laughs in the episode that presents it, and it is genuinely funny as a joke, but it is also a precise description of a radioactive material being used as a casual desk accessory in a working office environment, exposing everyone who enters that office to continuous radiation without their knowledge or consent. The cooling towers have cracks in them. The cracks have been patched with chewing gum, actual chewing gum, removed from someone's mouth and pressed into structural fractures in a nuclear cooling tower, rather than the appropriate engineering repairs that would require shutting down the affected units and spending money Burns did not wish to spend. Luminous rats inhabit the sublevels of the facility. These are rodents whose bodies have absorbed enough radioactive material to emit visible light. They live inside the working plant. Their existence tells you something specific about the radioactive contamination present within the building, that it is extensive enough and has been present for long enough to be absorbed by small mammals at levels sufficient to produce bioluminescence. And then there is the detail the show drops most quietly and most pointedly: human skeletons in the basement of the plant. The show shows you bones, human remains, in the basement of a working nuclear facility. It does not explain who these people were or how they came to be dead inside a reactor building. It shows you the bones and moves on. Nobody in the episode stops. Nobody asks the question that this discovery should immediately and obviously prompt. The safety inspection that found the 342 violations apparently noted the human remains and included them in the count and moved on. The man whose professional responsibility is to ensure that none of this happens, the person whose literal job title is safety inspector, is Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, whose IQ is 55 by the show's own creators' accounting. Homer Simpson, who has a crayon lodged in his brain that has been physically reducing his cognitive function since childhood. Homer Simpson, who regularly falls asleep at his workstation, who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would grow larger. This is the man standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. He has held this position for over 3 decades and has failed at it continuously and completely for every single day of those 3 decades, and the plant is still running. Now, here is where the theory becomes something more than a collection of jokes about workplace incompetence. The first visible evidence of what the plant has done to Springfield appears in Season 2, in a detail so explicit that it should have ended any ambiguity. A fish is caught in the river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. The show does not play this as a casual background joke. The 3-eyed fish becomes national news within Springfield's universe. A political candidate uses it named Blinky by the public as the centerpiece of a campaign against Burns, arguing that it is physical evidence of environmental contamination caused by the plant's radioactive discharge. This argument is treated by every character in the episode as obviously correct. Burns is forced to respond. He goes on live television and eats the fish to prove it is safe. The political moment passes. And then something happens that is the most important single event in Springfield's relationship with its own contamination. Nobody does anything. Nobody tests the water. Nobody conducts an independent scientific assessment of the local ecosystem. Nobody follows the candidate's logic to its next step, which would be to ask whether fish with 3 eyes indicate anything about the people drinking the same water. The town watches Burns eat Blinky on television, and it moves on. And the question of what the plant has been doing to Springfield's population is set aside and never formally raised again. The answer to that question has been visible in every episode since. It just requires you to know what you're looking at. Look at Homer Simpson carefully. His skull shape does not correspond to standard human cranial anatomy. The proportions are wrong in ways that cannot be explained by artistic license alone, or rather, they can be explained by artistic license. But within the logic of the show's own world, those proportions are what Homer actually looks like. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His eyes protrude from his skull in a way that suggests some kind of orbital anomaly. His intelligence, as established by the show's creator, and by the specific episode in which a crayon is removed from his brain and his IQ temporarily elevates to genius level before he chooses to have the crayon replaced, is impaired to a degree that, in any medical context, would qualify as a significant cognitive disability. He is, at baseline, operating with brain function meaningfully below average. And he has been doing so for his entire life. Working in close proximity to an active nuclear reactor, drinking the water downstream from a facility with 342 safety violations, living in the shadow of cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum. His physical resilience is the other side of the same coin. Homer has been shot and lived. He has been electrocuted and lived. He has fallen from significant heights, been struck by moving vehicles, been caught in explosions at close range, and survived all of it with minimal lasting damage, returning to roughly his baseline state with a speed that has no analog in normal human medicine. This combination profound cognitive impairment paired with extraordinary physical resilience is exactly what you might expect from a body that has been continuously exposed to significant radiation for decades. The radiation damages the brain, which is among the most sensitive tissues in the human body to ionizing radiation, producing the cognitive impairment we observe. But it also alters the body's healing processes at the cellular level, potentially producing the extraordinary physical durability we also observe. Homer's body has adapted to the radiation environment it has spent its entire existence in. The adaptation has costs concentrated in his mental function and benefits that manifest as his inhuman capacity to absorb physical damage. Marge Simpson presents many of the same physical characteristics. The protruding eyes, the 4 fingers, and then there is the hair. Marge's hair grows straight upward in a tower that has maintained its exact shape and height for 36 years. This is not the kind of thing normal human hair does. Normal human hair does not form a rigid tower extending 2 or more feet above the skull, without product, without structural support, without any visible maintenance effort. Whatever is happening with Marge's hair, within the show's internal logic, represents a deviation from standard human biology significant enough to warrant attention. Yet nobody in Springfield ever comments on it. It is simply accepted, the way everything in Springfield is accepted, as normal. Here is the detail that converts this from plausible speculation into something more specific. When characters arrive in Springfield from outside the town, they look different. This is a well-documented visual feature of the show observed by fans for decades. Guest characters, celebrities, people established to be from elsewhere, are drawn with proportions closer to standard human anatomy. Their eyes are less protruding, their features are more regular. Their overall appearance is measurably closer to what a human being would actually look like. The conventional explanation is that it is simply the show's art style. Springfield residents look the way they do because that is how The Simpsons draws people, and guest characters look more realistic because the artists are referencing real human beings. This is a perfectly reasonable production explanation. But within the logic of Springfield as an actual place, treating it not as a television show but as a reality, the theories are trying to map the visible difference between people from inside Springfield and people from outside. It is an observable physical phenomenon. People who live inside the contamination zone look different from people who don't. The physical characteristics the radiation theory predicts are present in Springfield's residents and absent in its visitors. The show's art style and the radiation theory are not contradictions. They describe the same phenomenon from two different perspectives. From the production side, it's a visual shorthand. From inside Springfield's universe, it's what 30 years of low-level radiation exposure does to a human population. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes and deviant proportions as his owners. Not because the show draws all characters in the same style, but because within the world of the show, this is what the dog actually looks like. An animal raised in Springfield's contaminated environment, drinking Springfield's water. He looks like a Springfield creature because he is one. Burns knows. This is the aspect of the theory that elevates it from an interesting observation into something more deliberate and more disturbing. Burns has personal physicians. He funds private medical research. He undergoes weekly treatments that manage the effects of radiation on his own body with a precision that requires sophisticated, sustained pharmaceutical infrastructure. The show reveals in the Springfield files that these treatments are so intensive that they cause Burns's body to emit visible green light after each session. He literally glows. With enough intensity that Homer, encountering him in the woods after a treatment, genuinely believes he has seen an alien. A man who is managing his own radiation biology with that level of sophistication understands what radiation does to biological systems with a depth that no one else in Springfield possesses. Burns knows what chronic radiation exposure does to cognitive function, to physical development, to aging processes. He knows because he manages all of these things in his own body every single week on a schedule so precise that missing one treatment means death within days. And Burns owns the facility that has been doing these things to Springfield for 60 years. Homer's employment is the most specific piece of evidence for the theory's most uncomfortable implication. When German investors briefly acquired the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. His presence was immediately identified by anyone looking with fresh eyes as obviously incompatible with responsible nuclear operations. He should not be there. The German investors then began calculating the cost of bringing the plant up to code. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. Burns repurchased the plant, and the first thing Burns did was rehire Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within weeks of taking the position seriously. The violations are too numerous and too well documented to survive genuine scrutiny. Homer's continued presence at the facility is not an accident of his limited employment options. It is a deliberate choice by the person who owns the facility. Homer's incompetence is not a liability to Burns. It is an operational necessity. It ensures the violations continue, that the radiation keeps leaking, that the water stays contaminated, that the population of Springfield continues to be slowly, quietly, continuously exposed to the substance that keeps them pliable, keeps their critical thinking impaired, keeps them from organizing the sustained, coherent response to the plant's operations that a population with undamaged cognitive function would be capable of mounting. The crayon lodged in Homer's brain is the show's most pointed metaphor for this dynamic, even if it arrives wrapped in comedy. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had the crayon removed. His IQ elevated dramatically. He became intelligent, articulate, capable of genuine insight. He looked at Springfield and saw it clearly for what it was. He saw his job clearly. He saw the plant clearly. He saw the entire architecture of his situation with a precision that, the show makes plain, was profoundly uncomfortable. Being intelligent in Springfield meant being aware of things that people in Springfield are not supposed to be aware of. Homer had the crayon replaced. He chose the fog. He chose not to see. The fog is more comfortable than the clarity. But the fog was available to choose, because Burns made sure it was. He keeps Homer at the plant. He keeps the plant leaking. He keeps the water contaminated. And the contamination keeps the fog in place across the entire population, making the choice Homer made individually a condition of life for everyone in Springfield, whether they have consciously chosen it or not. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. Within the framework of everything the show has documented, it is a population living inside a contamination zone, experiencing the cognitive and physical effects of that contamination in real time, too impaired by those effects to recognize what is producing them. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the impossible hair and the extraordinary physical resilience and the profound cognitive vulnerability are not stylistic choices. They are symptoms. The three-eyed fish is not a gag. It is a medical report. The plant is not a backdrop. It is the entire story. It has always been the entire story. And nobody in Springfield will ever fully figure that out, because the plant already made sure they can't. Section 3, Homer's coma. The dream that never ended. There is a date that divides The Simpsons into two completely different shows. The first of April 1993. The 18th episode of the 4th season aired on that date. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple and slightly undignified in the way that clip shows always are. Bart, in the spirit of April Fool's Day, plays a series of escalating pranks on Homer. The escalation eventually leads him to take one of Homer's cans of beer to an auto body shop and place it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes it until the can is pressurized beyond anything its aluminum walls are designed to contain. Then he brings it home and puts it back with the others. Homer finds the can. Homer opens the can. The explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. The show is clear about this. Homer is injured badly enough by the explosion of a beer can to require hospitalization. He lies in his hospital bed, recovering, watching the world from the flat of his back the way people do when they are forced by injury to stop and be still for a moment. He sees a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets out of bed to get it. The machine tips over and falls on him. Homer Simpson flatlines on the 1st of April 1993. He enters a coma. Not a cutaway gag, not a dream sequence flagged as such. A genuine, medically described coma that lasts 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer apparently waking. Bart is at his bedside, tearful, confessing that the April Fool's prank was his fault, that he is responsible for what happened to his father. Homer hears this confession and springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. The show tells you he woke up. The credits roll. Life in Springfield continues. But before the episode ends entirely, it delivers one more piece of information. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function. 5% permanently destroyed, never returning. The coma ate part of his brain and left the rest to carry on without it. Homer's response to being told he has sustained permanent brain damage is to laugh and to mention that he doesn't know why he's laughing. His family finds this charming. The coma theory is the most famous fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. It was originally articulated by a Reddit user, and it has been discussed, debated, refined, and argued about ever since with a persistence that suggests people find in it something that resonates, some quality of emotional truth that is harder to dismiss than its surface premise would suggest. The premise is this: Homer did not wake up from his coma in April 1993. Every episode of The Simpsons that has aired since that date is a dream being generated by the mind of a man lying unconscious in a hospital bed in Springfield General. The adventures are not real. The guest stars are not real. The adventures to space, and the meetings with presidents, and the 170 different jobs, and the discovery of his fugitive mother, and every increasingly surreal and physically impossible thing that has happened to Homer Simpson, since the 4th season, are not real. They are the dream life of a comatose man, constructed by a damaged brain from the memory of everything he loved and the ambient noise of a hospital room. The evidence is extensive enough that the theory has attracted serious engagement, including from the show's own writers. The most immediately compelling piece of evidence is the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons is a particular kind of show. It is funny, yes, always funny, but it is grounded in the recognizable texture of working-class American domestic life. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she is happy in her marriage. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year in school. Lisa has a crush on a substitute teacher. These are the concerns of a real family. Scaled, exaggerated, filtered through the sharp intelligence of the writing staff, but real. The emotional weight of early Simpsons comes from its rootedness in the kind of situations actual families navigate. After the coma, the show becomes something else. Homer goes to space, not visits a space-adjacent location in a dream sequence. Goes to space on a real shuttle with Buzz Aldrin. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante mob. He joins a secret society. He discovers that his mother is a fugitive radical who has been living underground for decades. He meets God, twice. The escalation is so dramatic and so sudden that the internet has been trying to locate the moment The Simpsons changed for 20 years. Fans speak of the golden age and the decline. They argue about which season represents the transition point. Different people place it in different seasons. But when you chart the timeline against the coma episode, something becomes clear. The escalation begins precisely when Homer goes under. The show that was grounded in domestic realism ends on the 1st of April 1993. The show that replaces it is the dream version. More colorful, more extreme, more disconnected from consequences, operating in a world where the physics of Homer's situation have become negotiable in ways they were not before. Homer can be shot in the dream. He survives. He can fall from tall structures. He walks away. The laws of cause and effect that govern the first 4 seasons where Homer's decisions produced consequences that shaped subsequent episodes dissolve in the post-coma show into a continuous reset, a world that refreshes itself between episodes, where nothing that happens in one installment leaves a permanent mark on the next. A dream does this. A dream resets every time you fall deeper into sleep. A comatose brain, cycling through its memories and its fears and its deepest hopes, does not maintain continuous consequence the way a waking life does. It generates narratives that feel internally real in the moment and dissolve at the edges. 6 months before the coma episode, the season 4 premiere showed Homer having a face-to-face conversation with God. Not a metaphorical visitation, an actual conversation. And in that conversation, God told Homer something specific. That Homer would learn the meaning of life, but not yet. His time was coming, but it had not come. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The coma theory reads this as a prophecy. God told Homer that his time was nearly up, that there was something larger coming, something that would change the nature of his experience. And 6 months later, the vending machine falls, and Homer's conscious life ends, and the dream begins. And in the dream, Homer finds the meaning of life over and over again in every episode. It is always his family. It is always the house on Evergreen Terrace. It is always Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, preserved exactly as they were on the day he last saw them clearly. Nobody ages in the dream because the dreaming brain cannot age them. Homer's mind went under in April 1993 with a specific image of his family. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1, Marge is in her mid-30s with the impossible blue hair. The dreaming brain can generate new adventures for them, can place them in new settings, can bring in voices and faces it absorbs from the ambient noise of the hospital room around Homer's unconscious body. But it cannot age them. It does not know what they look like 10 years older. It only has the image from the day the vending machine fell. This is why the floating timeline exists. Not as a production convenience, as the logical behavior of a frozen mind. The celebrity appearances that multiply so dramatically in the show's later seasons fit the theory with unsettling precision. Homer's hospital room has a television. The television plays programs. The radio plays music. People at Homer's bedside have conversations about the news and culture and celebrities of the moment. Homer's unconscious brain absorbs these fragments through whatever attenuated sensory processing a comatose brain is capable of, and it weaves them into the dream. That is why later seasons are full of musicians and actors and athletes and politicians appearing in Springfield as if the town were the center of American cultural life. It is not that Springfield became a destination. It is that Homer's dream is collaging itself from the ambient media environment of his hospital room, incorporating whatever faces and names and voices filter through to him. The show acknowledged the theory directly in season 34, in a scene that was released as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene, showing Homer waking from a long coma to reveal that all the outlandish episodes were a dream. The writers created this scene, fully animated and voiced, as a direct reference to the theory. They then revealed it was a hoax, a fake scene planted to look like a leak. The official position was that it was not canon, not real, just an elaborate joke. But they made it. They made the scene where Homer wakes from the coma and the whole show is revealed to be a dream. They animated it. They put time and resources into depicting exactly what the fan theory describes as the truth. And they then released it and called it a joke. You can read this as the writers having fun with their audience. You can also read it as the writers showing you the truth with one hand and taking it away with the other. The denial arrived, wrapped inside a confirmation. And the audience laughed, because the audience always laughs. Just like Homer laughed when he was told about the 5%. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in interviews, dismissing it as fan speculation. He said it is not true. He did not address why nobody ages. He did not address the tonal shift. He did not address the conversation with God. He said it is not true and moved on. And it is worth noting that Al Jean not wanting the coma theory to be true is completely compatible with the coma theory being true within the show's internal logic. The show does not need to officially endorse a theory for the theory to be supported by the show's own text. What the theory does that no official explanation ever quite manages is make everything fit at once. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the escalating surrealism, the reset button, the celebrity flood, Homer's extraordinary physical survival rate, all of it has the same explanation. Homer is in a coma. His mind is running. The simulation gets stranger over time because the brain generating it is slowly deteriorating, losing its capacity to maintain coherent physics, letting more and more of the dream's impossible logic bleed through. And the emotional heart of the theory is the part that stays with you after the intellectual argument is over. If this is all a coma dream, then what Homer is dreaming is very simple. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous little boy, always on the edge of trouble, always in need of a father's intervention even when that father is imperfect in every measurable way. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, the small sound of it rising through the floors of the house on Evergreen Terrace. He wants Maggie small enough to hold, small enough to fit in the crook of his arm, small enough to still need protecting. The dream is generous to him. It gives him all of this. It keeps the children from growing up and away. It keeps Marge from changing into someone he does not recognize. It keeps the house exactly as it was. It keeps the beer cold and the couch comfortable, and the television playing and the family intact. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. The show will never confirm this. The show will never deny it either, because the denial would require answering questions the show cannot answer without the theory, so it keeps running. The dream keeps generating episodes. Homer keeps surviving impossible things because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in the hospital. His mind is in Springfield. And the mind cannot kill him because the mind is the one telling the story. Every episode since April 1993 is an act of love. A dying man dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. And every time the credits roll and everything resets and Springfield goes back to exactly the way it was, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. How old his children really are. Whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting beside his bed, or it means not waking up at all. The dream continues. It always continues. Because Homer is still in there, holding on to the only thing he has left, and the only thing he has left is all of them, preserved perfect and unchanging in the amber of an April afternoon in 1993, when a vending machine fell and the world stopped and the dream began. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we begin this section, it is worth acknowledging something. The show gave us an answer. Season 7, Episode 1. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 2. Chief Wiggum investigates. Suspects are cleared. DNA evidence points toward a Simpson. And then Burns wakes from his coma and identifies his shooter. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson. Case closed. Except it was not closed. It has never been closed. And the more you examine the official verdict, the more it resembles a convenience rather than a conclusion. Let us go back to the summer of 1995, because the context matters enormously. The Simpsons pulled off something in the summer between seasons 6 and 7 that no animated show had ever attempted. A genuine, premeditated mystery. A whodunit with suspects, motives, clues, and a national contest asking viewers to guess the answer. The prize was extraordinary. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. Fox promoted it as a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special, treating the fictional shooting as a real unsolved case. The show, for the duration of that summer, existed in a genuinely unusual space between fiction and participatory puzzle. Part 1 establishes the crime with meticulous care. Burns has, over the course of the episode, wronged every significant character in Springfield. He has stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget. He has destroyed Moe's bar through financial manipulation. He has created a sinkhole that took out the retirement home. He has injured Santa's little helper. And then, for his final act, he has constructed a massive mechanical device to block the sun over the entire town, plunging Springfield into permanent artificial darkness so that every resident is forced to purchase their electricity from his power plant. When Smithers protests, he is fired on the spot. Every person in Springfield has a motive. The show is careful about this. It distributes grievance with precision. Homer, because Burns has never learned his name despite decades of employment. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because his livelihood was eliminated. Tito Puente, because his music program was cut. Moe, because his bar collapsed. Even Smithers, perhaps, especially Smithers, freshly fired, spiraling, with 20 years of complicated devotion curdled into something the show lets you read as dangerous. Burns is confronted at a town meeting. Multiple characters are shown with weapons. Tensions reach a breaking point. Burns collapses, shot one bullet, and he staggers onto the town sundial with his hands falling across two letters, W and S. Or from Burns's perspective, upside down, M and S. The summer passes. Part 2 airs. The investigation unfolds as comedy. Smithers confesses immediately, but his alibi is ironclad in the most humiliating way possible. He was blackout drunk, did commit a shooting that night, but shot Jasper's wooden leg in a completely different location. Not Burns. Wrong victim. Wrong time. Wrong crime. Suspects fall away. DNA evidence from an eyelash on Burns's suit points to a Simpson. Homer is arrested. The case seems closed. Then Burns wakes up and tells the room who did it, Maggie. He encountered her in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. The contest, meanwhile, was never actually solved. Of the thousands of entries submitted, the randomly selected sample did not contain a single correct answer. The person who was awarded the prize received a cash settlement instead of being animated because they had not guessed correctly. The one person who had posted the correct answer online on a Simpsons news group the night of the original broadcast was using a college internet account that had since been closed. The producers tried to find them. They could not. As far as anyone knows, they never came forward. Think about what this means for a moment. The show's creators invited the public to solve a mystery using clues embedded in the episode. They then gave the prize to someone who had not solved it, and the one person who apparently did solve it vanished into the early internet and was never heard from again. Now, let us examine the problems with the official verdict. Burns himself said that his hands falling on the letters of the sundial was not intentional. He did not position himself to communicate his shooter's initials. He fell. The sundial clue, the central physical evidence, the image that runs through both episodes and serves as the mystery's visual centerpiece, was, according to the victim, a coincidence. The most important clue in the case is meaningless by the explicit statement of the person it supposedly came from. Burns was carrying a gun in a holster. Before the shooting, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from his person at the time of the attack. This is a specific and significant detail. It means that whoever shot Burns did not bring a weapon to the town meeting. They used Burns's own gun, which means the shooter was someone who did not plan violence in advance. Someone who encountered the weapon by chance, after the meeting, in a context where Burns's gun was already loose and accessible. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does a dozen other people at the meeting who were not shown carrying weapons. Burns's last words before being shot were, "Oh, it's you." Not a scream, not a warning. A calm, recognizing statement of identification. "Oh, it's you," said the way you would say it to someone familiar, someone you have seen before, someone you do not perceive as a threat in the moment you see them. Does Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever interacted with Maggie in a way that would produce the specific, calm quality of, "Oh, it's you," as a greeting? The show does not establish a relationship between Burns and Maggie prior to this event. Burns famously cannot remember Homer's name despite decades of employment. The idea that he would greet a baby he barely knows with the tone of familiar recognition does not fit what we know of him. In season 18, Homer casually mentions that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says this out loud, in a scene that is not framed as a joke, and nobody around him reacts to it. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. The richest man in Springfield was shot, and Homer Simpson just said he did it, and Springfield moved on. Either Homer is lying for attention, which his character supports, or the original verdict was wrong. The Marge theory has genuine structural support. A Reddit-documented theory argues that Marge is the real shooter, and Burns's identification of Maggie was a deliberate misdirection driven by something the show has actually established. Burns's infatuation with Marge. The show depicted Burns falling in love with Marge in an earlier episode. Marge gets a job. The theory holds that Burns, waking from his coma to identify his shooter, saw the question of truth versus protecting Marge and chose Marge. He pointed at the sundial. He let the town read what it wanted to read. And Maggie, who cannot be prosecuted, Chief Wiggum, says explicitly that no jury would convict a baby became the perfect resolution. An answer that closed the case without punishing anyone worth punishing, and that protected the person Burns could not bring himself to name. The alternate endings prove that even the writers were not fully committed to a single answer. A complete, fully animated, fully voiced alternate conclusion was produced in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. This ending was shown during the 138th episode, Spectacular, a clip show in which it is dismissed by the host as something that wouldn't have made sense because the DNA evidence would have to be ignored, which would be, in the host's words, downright nutty. The host then makes a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, where a jury famously did ignore DNA evidence. The show is winking at you. It is telling you that ignoring DNA evidence to reach a desired verdict is something that happens. It is telling you that the official answer is not necessarily the correct answer. It is telling you that evidence can be made to point wherever those with the authority to direct the investigation want it to point. And the final shot of Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2 shows Maggie, alone in an empty room, checking to confirm she is unobserved, and then moving her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as a confession. Maggie did it, and she knows she did it, and she is reenacting it in private with the self-awareness of someone who understands what occurred. But there is another reading. Maggie is 1 year old. She was present at the shooting. She saw something happen. She is doing what babies do with new experiences. She is repeating the motion she witnessed, imitating something she saw an adult do, the way all young children imitate the behavior of those around them. She is not confessing. She is remembering. The case was never solved. It was closed, which in Springfield is not the same thing. The greatest mystery in the show's history has an official answer that the show's own evidence does not fully support. A victim whose testimony is unreliable, a piece of central physical evidence the victim described as meaningless, an alternate shooter whose ending was fully produced and then dismissed with a joke about a famous acquittal, and a baby in an empty room doing something with her pacifier that could mean anything at all. Springfield closed the case. That is not the same as knowing what happened. Section 5. The Immortality of Charles Montgomery Burns. How old is Mr. Burns? The show has never given a definitive answer, and the answers it has gestured toward contradict each other enough that pinning down a single number is genuinely difficult. What is not difficult is establishing the outer boundaries. Burns has personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died decades before the show's audience was born. He served in World War II, which places his birth no later than the 1920s at the absolute most generous reading, and almost certainly considerably earlier. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history read in books, but as something he lived through, worked within, moved through as a young man, finding his footing in a world that did not yet have the technologies it would develop in the century that followed. By the most conservative accounting, Burns is somewhere above 100 years old. By the liberal reading of the show's scattered biographical references, he might be pushing 140, and he functions. This is the part that matters. Not just that he exists, that he runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation, that he manipulates municipal politics, that he orchestrates schemes requiring sustained strategic intelligence, long-term planning, detailed understanding of modern finance and law and technology and human psychology. His body is frail, yes. His physical strength is nearly non-existent. A strong breeze can knock him sideways, but his mind is sharp in a way that makes him the most operationally dangerous person in Springfield. Burns is, by most measures, the most intelligent character in the show. His strategic ruthlessness operates at a level nobody else in Springfield can approach. And he has been operating at that level, sustained at that level, for longer than any human biology in any documented case has been known to support sustained consciousness. The Springfield Files explains the mechanism, though it presents it as a throwaway joke about an alien sighting. Homer encounters a glowing figure in the woods near Springfield and is convinced he has seen a visitor from another world. FBI investigation ensues. The truth is that the glowing figure is Burns, walking in his customary post-treatment days through the woods outside the facility that performs his weekly medical maintenance. Burns undergoes a medical regimen so intensive, so loaded with pharmaceutical and radiological intervention, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The glow persists for a period after each session. The treatments keep him alive and functional for precisely 7 more days. Without them, he dies. The margin for error is 0. Miss one appointment and Burns's biological systems begin shutting down with a speed that makes the dependency absolute. His life is maintained the way a machine is maintained, through scheduled servicing, through precise, recurring intervention by people who understand exactly what he needs and exactly when he needs it. And the substance at the center of these treatments is radiation. Of course it is. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for 60 years, is himself sustained by controlled radiation exposure administered on a weekly schedule. Burns is not just profiting from nuclear energy, he is powered by it. His biology has been altered at such a fundamental level by his decades of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer maintain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way ordinary humans require food. This explains the famous scene in which a doctor informs Burns that he has every disease known to medical science simultaneously present in his body. Every one of them. The doctor's explanation for why Burns is still alive despite hosting the complete catalog of human illness is what he calls Three Stooges syndrome. All of Burns's diseases are present at once, each one attempting to kill him, each one blocked by the simultaneous presence of every other disease also attempting to kill him. They are in perfect equilibrium, a biological gridlock in which nothing can gain enough advantage to win. The scene is one of the most quoted in the show's history. It is presented as pure, absurdist comedy, but under the radiation theory, it describes something real. Burns's diseases are not in equilibrium through natural processes. The weekly radiation treatments are managing them. They do not cure anything. They hold everything in stasis. They maintain the precise biochemical balance that keeps every illness present but none of them dominant. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is the reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods. The right amount keeps everything balanced. Too much or too little, and the whole system goes critical. Smithers's role in this cannot be overstated. The show presents the relationship between Smithers and Burns as primarily about devotion, about a man who has given his entire life in service to someone he loves, In a way, the show treats with complexity and genuine pathos. But beneath the emotional dynamic, Smithers is performing a function that is literally life-sustaining. He manages Burns' schedule, he ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment, he monitors Burns' physical condition with a vigilance that goes beyond professional duty into something closer to medical vigilance. Smithers knows the treatment protocol in a way that may be unique. If Smithers were removed from the equation, fired, resigned, disappeared, Burns would miss a dose. The equilibrium would break. The diseases would surge. Smithers' devotion is real, but it is also maintained by something beneath devotion. He knows that he is the only thing standing between Burns and the collapse of the system that keeps him alive. His loyalty is emotional. His commitment is structural necessity. Burns' connection to historical events adds layers that the show introduces and never fully explores. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He served in World War II in ways the show describes as morally compromised at best. He was in possession of a $1 trillion bill that he had held for decades. He describes the Gilded Age with the specific texture of personal memory. His family wealth, the show establishes, predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns dynasty has been one of the longest continuously operating power concentrations in American history. What the show does not address is whether Burns is unique in this regard. If the Burns family has maintained control of its fortune and its influence across centuries, was Charles Montgomery Burns the first to find a mechanism for extending a human lifespan beyond its biological limits? Or were there previous generations of Burns patriarchs who found their own methods? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before the pharmaceutical infrastructure that currently keeps him alive? Was there something else? The show does not say, but it establishes that the family's continuity across time is extraordinary in a way that pure generational succession does not explain. Burns has survived being shot. He has survived hospitalization dozens of times. He has survived being abandoned in the wilderness, poisoned, collapsed. Each time he returns through the same mechanism, the infrastructure of accumulated wealth ensures there is always someone standing by with the resources to put him back together. Homer survives things because the show's internal logic demands it. Burns survives things because he has spent a century building a system whose primary purpose is ensuring his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical body. Homer's immortality, such as it is passive. Something happens to him, and he endures it and heals, and the show moves on. Burns's immortality is engineered. Every dollar he has ever spent, every institution he has ever corrupted, every doctor he has ever retained, every politician he has ever purchased, every arrangement he has ever made over a century of operation, all of it serves, among its other purposes, the single function of keeping Burns alive and keeping the treatments coming. If Burns dies, the empire dies with him. And empires, as Burns understands better than anyone, do not allow themselves to die when they have the means to continue. The most unsettling aspect of the Burns immortality question is not that he survives. It is that Springfield needs him to. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the medical infrastructure that only Burns's wealth can sustain. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining cycle in which the man, the machine, and the money all feed each other with no external correction mechanism. Springfield cannot dismantle the system because Springfield cannot survive without the output the system produces. Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system finally stops, and the system stopping means a century of consequences come due all at once. Burns is not immortal. He is too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as he keeps the lights on. Which, if his treatment schedule holds, is forever. Section 6. Maggie Simpson. The silence beneath the pacifier. Maggie Simpson does not speak. This is the fact the show presents most consistently about its youngest character, and it is the fact that requires the most scrutiny. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. 2-0, she has been attached to her pacifier for the entirety of that existence. She communicates through sounds, through gesture, through the particular quality of her stare, which anyone who watches the show with attention eventually notices is not quite a baby stare, not quite passive and absorbing in the way infant attention is usually depicted. Maggie watches things. She watches them with a focus that does not fit her apparent developmental stage. She has spoken exactly once in a meaningful, canonical sense. Her first word was daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a one-time cameo performance. Said once, clearly, with intent, and then never repeated. She returned to silence, and she has maintained it for decades since. The show has offered many moments over its run that could be read as evidence that Maggie's silence is not a developmental limitation. The most extensive of these is The Longest Daycare, a 7-minute theatrical short released in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award. Its premise is simple. Maggie is deposited at a daycare center and encounters a caterpillar that she wants to protect from a bullying baby who wants to destroy it. What follows is an extended sequence in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the staff, and the facility's security architecture to save the caterpillar and release it. She does this without speaking. She does it through observation, strategic planning, improvisation, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults struggle with under pressure. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops approaches and executes them with timing and spatial intelligence. She predicts the behavior of other characters accurately enough to account for their actions in advance. She does all of this while physically limited to the motor capacity of a 1-year-old. She falls, she stumbles, she crawls, but her decision-making is precise in a way her body cannot match. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly across several episodes, with results that the narrative treats as quick jokes but that leave a consistent impression. Maggie's measured intelligence is extraordinary. Off any standard scale, beyond what the testing instruments can comfortably capture, the pattern across 36 years is too consistent to dismiss. Maggie consistently demonstrates cognitive abilities that a 1-year-old should not possess, and her family consistently fails to register this because they are too occupied with Homer's disasters, Bart's provocations, and Lisa's causes to pay sustained attention to the baby observing quietly from her playpen. The silence theory holds that Maggie does not speak because she has decided not to, not because she cannot, because she has assessed her situation with the intelligence she possesses and concluded that silence is the optimal strategy. The evidence for this is found in the person she has been watching most closely for her entire life. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Genuinely, measurably, conspicuously brilliant. And what has that brilliance produced for her? Isolation? Dismissal? A life spent being the most perceptive person in every room she enters and receiving, in return for this gift, the combined indifference of a family too exhausted by its own chaos to pay attention to her, and a community with no mechanisms for honoring the kind of intelligence she represents. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets pushed back. Lisa tries to improve things and is told, by the structure of Springfield itself, that improvement is not wanted. Her intelligence is visible, announced, worn on the outside. And the outside world consistently declines to reward it. Maggie has been watching this happen since the day she was born, and Maggie has drawn a conclusion that Lisa has not. Visibility is a liability. Speaking announces your capabilities and invites the systems around you to constrain them. The safest version of intelligence is intelligence that nobody knows you have. Consider the practical results of this strategy across the show's run. Maggie shoots Burns, and the investigation focuses on every other character in Springfield because who suspects a baby? Nobody. The baby is the last person considered, the last person the investigation arrives at, and once it does arrive there, the system immediately provides an exit. No jury would convict a baby and closes the matter without further scrutiny. Maggie acts, the town's attention passes over her entirely, and she is returned to her playpen unexamined. The daycare rebellion succeeds because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic intervention Maggie makes across the show's run occurs in the space beneath adult attention, in the margins where nobody is looking carefully enough to see what she is doing. She has created this space deliberately. She maintains the disguise of helpless infancy with the consistency and commitment of someone who understands exactly how valuable the disguise is. She is passive when watched. She is precise when not. She performs exactly what the adults around her expect a baby to perform: dependent, reactive, easily distracted by bright objects, and she does this so consistently and so convincingly that even her family, who live with her, who have been present for 36 years of her quiet interventions, still primarily experiences her as the baby. Connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect each person differently, Maggie represents the far end of a spectrum from Homer. Homer's mutation reduced his cognitive function to the point of clinical disability. Maggie's mutation amplified hers to levels beyond what standard testing can address. Same source, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. The father's brain was diminished. The youngest daughter's was supercharged. Homer and Maggie are the same radioactive coin. He is what happens when the mutation takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something extraordinary. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a particular weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since April 1993 is a comatose brain generating simulations of its lost life, then Maggie's intelligence is Homer's prayer for his youngest child projected into the dream, because he cannot know what she will actually become. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot watch her develop. He cannot hear her speak or observe what kind of person she is becoming in the real world outside his hospital room. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that exceeds her age and her physical capacity. He makes her capable of things no actual baby could do, because his unconscious mind needs to believe that Maggie will be okay. That she is equipped for whatever she will face. That the smallest, most vulnerable member of his family carries something inside her that no one can take away. Her genius in the dream is not a mutation. It is a father's hope, given form, but there is a darker reading available from within Springfield's waking reality, if such a thing exists. Maggie doesn't speak because speaking gets you nothing in Springfield. She doesn't reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She has watched and listened and processed everything around her for 36 years, accumulating information about the town, its systems, its residents, its patterns, its vulnerabilities. And she is waiting. For what? The show has never said. Maggie's endgame is the one mystery the show has consistently declined to address. We have seen what she is capable of in fragments, the shooting, the rebellion, the rescues, the moments where her judgment is sought and trusted implicitly by the people around her. We have seen the range of what she can do. We have not seen the full extent of what she intends. She is 1 year old. She has 4 fingers on each hand. She cannot reliably walk without falling, and she is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She just has not decided what to do about it yet. And that, perhaps, is the most interesting unsolved question the show has produced across its entire run. Not who shot Burns, not where Springfield is located, not whether Homer is dreaming, but what Maggie is planning. Behind the pacifier, behind those enormous absorbing eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is watching, something is waiting. And when Maggie finally acts, when she decides that the moment she has been preparing for has arrived and she breaks the silence and does whatever it is that requires this much preparation, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. That is exactly how she designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions. Prophecy or Pattern. In the year 2000, a Simpsons episode depicted a future America in which Donald Trump had been president. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. The moment Trump's victory was confirmed, the clip went viral in a way that transcended the show's actual fan base and entered the mainstream cultural conversation. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years were sharing screenshots and asking the same question. How did they know? This question has been asked about this show with remarkable frequency over the past 3 decades. The show predicted smart watches. The show predicted the Disney-Fox merger. The show predicted a pandemic flu originating in Asia, complete with panic buying and a frantic search for a cure 27 years before COVID-19. The show depicted video calling, autocorrect errors, and surveillance culture before any of these were part of daily life. Homer proposed a theory about the universe being donut-shaped that years later found some support in cosmological data. A 1998 episode showed a mathematical equation that appears to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. The list is long and the entries are varied, and the cumulative effect, when you encounter them in concentrated form, is genuinely uncanny. The Simpsons feels like a document from the future delivered to the past. But here is what the people who actually made the show say about this. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer for the majority of the show's run, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and repeatedly. His explanation is blunt and practical. If you throw enough darts, you will hit some bullseyes. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of satirical observations, jokes, cultural references, and extrapolations of current trends. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some of it will align with future events through sheer statistical probability. You are not predicting. You are producing so many predictions that probability alone guarantees some fraction of them will prove accurate. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most beloved seasons, has put it even more plainly. The show is mainly just coincidence, he has said. The episodes are old enough that history repeats itself. The cyclical nature of human behavior means that situations depicted in a 1993 episode will recur in some form eventually, and when they do, the clip surfaces and the prediction narrative begins. Fact-checking organizations that have examined the most famous examples systematically find that most of them have mundane explanations. The Trump episode did not predict the future. It observed the present Trump had been publicly floating the idea of a presidential run since the late 1980s and had been a well-documented presence in American celebrity culture for decades. The writers looked at celebrity culture, looked at the direction of American political theater, and took that trajectory to its logical extreme. That is not prophecy. That is attentive satire. The Disney-Fox merger did not materialize from a mystical vision. Media consolidation had been accelerating for years before the episode that depicted it. The writers observed a trend and pushed it forward one step. The smartwatch was not a magical prediction. Technology had been getting progressively smaller and more personal for decades, and the writers imagined what a wrist-mounted computer might eventually look like. These are intelligent, educated people extrapolating current trajectories to plausible conclusions, not time travelers sending dispatches back through the medium of a cartoon. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically included graduates of Harvard, Yale, and other elite universities. Many writers have backgrounds in mathematics, science, computer science, and political theory. These are people whose professional lives are organized around understanding how systems work and where they are heading. They read trends more carefully than most people do. They then present the result of that careful reading as satirical comedy. When the trend arrives at the destination they described, it feels like prophecy. It is actually expertise. And then there is the confirmation bias problem, which is perhaps the most important element of the prediction phenomenon. The show has also made thousands of jokes that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies. Jokes about political outcomes that went completely the other way. Jokes about cultural shifts that never materialized. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds a theory around the predictions that failed, because the theory requires the hits and can only be maintained by ignoring the misses. Confirmation bias filters the show's enormous output down to a highlight reel that looks, in concentrated form, like something it is not. You remember the Trump prediction? You do not remember the 20 jokes around it in the same episode that referenced cultural trends that evaporated entirely? This is the honest, grounded explanation, and it is almost certainly correct. But then there are the cases that make even the honest explanation feel slightly insufficient. The Trump prediction did not just forecast that a celebrity might one day run for president. It specified Trump by name. And it showed him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors the actual announcement he made in 2015. The visual specificity is harder to dismiss as pure statistical coincidence than a general cultural trend would be. A 1,993 episode depicted a flu virus originating in Asia, causing mass panic, panic buying, and a desperate search for a cure. And during the fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally released a swarm of killer bees. In 2020, when a real pandemic arrived from Asia, accompanied by real panic buying and a real global search for treatment, the United States simultaneously experienced an outbreak of Asian giant hornets that the media dubbed murder hornets. The parallel is specific enough that even people predisposed to skepticism about the predictions have paused at it. In 1996, An episode featured a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra while incapacitated. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality. These are not general trend extrapolations. They are specific details that align with future events in ways that exceed the explanatory power of volume of content over time. Which brings us to the meta theory, the one that is more interesting than either prophecy or coincidence. The Simpsons may not predict the future. The Simpsons may shape it. Not through magic. Not through any mechanism that would require revising our understanding of causality. Through cultural influence, which is among the most powerful forces in the modern world. The Simpsons is one of the most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of the shared cultural vocabulary Americans use to understand their own society. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not disappear. It enters the bloodstream of the culture. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something people mention when they encounter Trump on the news. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel familiar, not shocking, not unthinkable, but like the punchline to a joke everyone already knows. And when the punchline arrives, it does not feel like surprise. It feels like recognition. Of course this happened. The Simpsons already did this. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. The show made media consolidation feel like an obvious, inevitable, almost boring development, just the logical next step in a process everyone already understood was underway. When the merger happened, the cultural response was not shock. It was a collective shrug and a shared reference to a cartoon that had depicted it 20 years earlier. The satire did not forecast the outcome. The satire normalized the trajectory. And normalized trajectories are easier to follow because nobody has to overcome the resistance of genuine surprise. Springfield doesn't reflect America. At this point, America has started to resemble Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the audience stared into it long enough that it began to look like a window. The nuclear power plant, the corrupt billionaire, the population too distracted to notice how badly they are being exploited, the endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that permits the same mistakes to be repeated indefinitely. The show did not invent these things. It identified them, it named them. It gave them a yellow family and a Sunday night time slot and a couch gag. And having been named, having been made familiar and visible and legible, these patterns became easier to live with, because at least they had already been laughed at. Springfield was never a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield was a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first, and then the world caught up to the writing. And everyone who had seen the episode felt the particular mixture of recognition and unease that the prediction phenomenon produces. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of very smart people paying very close attention for a very long time, and confirmation bias doing the rest of the work. But try explaining that to yourself, alone in the dark, the next time a Simpsons clip from 1,998 lines up perfectly with a headline from this morning. Because even knowing how the trick works, it still makes you pause. 800 episodes, 36 years, enough satirical observations about the trajectory of human civilization to fill a library. And somewhere in that library, tucked between the jokes that didn't land and the references that dated immediately, a line that turns out to describe your life, delivered by a yellow cartoon character who has been 10 years old since before you were born. The show wrote the future, or the future kept matching the show. At this point, the distance between those two things may be smaller than it appears. Section 8. Mona Simpson. The Mother, the Fugitive, the Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him this when Homer was young. He had shown Homer a grave. Homer had mourned. He had grown up believing he was a boy whose mother had died and whose father was too emotionally distant and too preoccupied with his own grievances to fill the space she left. The maternal loss was foundational to Homer's character in ways the show was careful not to state directly, but made clearly legible across dozens of early episodes. His desperate need to be liked. his terror of abandonment, which surfaces as clinginess with Marge and a compulsive need for the approval of people who have no particular reason to give it to him. His willingness to absorb humiliation and degradation from Burns rather than risk losing the stable structure of his employment. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is built on the absence of a mother he believed had died. Season 7 revealed that the absence was not death. Mother Simpson aired the 19th of November, 1995. It is considered one of the greatest episodes in the show's history, and the reason is not primarily its comedy. The reason is that it does something the show rarely does. It takes the emotional consequence of its own premise seriously, without flinching, without cutting away to a joke at the crucial moment. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, as Homer does. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant and lets the town believe he is gone. Marge eventually insists he go to the Hall of Records to correct the death certificate, and when Homer goes, he discovers something that changes his entire history. According to municipal records, his mother never died. She is alive. The grave Abe showed him belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. For Homer's entire life, Abe had been passing off a famous writer's headstone as his wife's burial site. Homer finds his mother at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, his freshly filed death having sent her there. She doesn't recognize him at first. He has changed in 30 years. But when Homer proves who he is, they have a reunion that is one of the most genuinely affecting scenes in the show's history. A grown man and his mother finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them, and then Mona tells him what happened. She didn't die. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because staying would have endangered him and Abe. She left because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would grow up to work for, had destroyed her life. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was ordinary by the show's own accounting, living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside went through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and the protests against Vietnam. And then something changed in her. The show depicts it with the particular combination of absurdist comedy and genuine feeling that defines its best work. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists who had identified a target, a biological weapons laboratory owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. Not just a nuclear power plant, a germ warfare facility, a laboratory designed to produce weaponized biological agents in the same town where Homer was growing up, where children were playing, where families were living their ordinary lives with no knowledge of what was being manufactured down the road. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological material stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the security guard on duty that night, a young Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was effective. The weapons were destroyed. Then Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. And Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not explain to her son why she was leaving, because explaining would put him and Abe in danger. She kissed Homer while he was sleeping and walked away. And Homer woke up and his mother was gone, and he was told she was dead, and he believed it. For 27 years. The conspiracy does not end with Mona's initial flight. Burns did not simply report her and move on. He pursued her. He held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his biological weapons program, and he used the full weight of his resources and connections to ensure she could never come home. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her through a cab window and immediately contacts the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye for the second time. Now knowing why she left, knowing who forced her out, and knowing that the man responsible is his employer. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns for his entire adult life. He earns his paycheck from the man who destroyed his family. He spends 40 hours a week in a facility owned by the person who stole his mother, and he does not make the connection. The show does not play this as a joke. It plays it as tragedy, using comedy's framework to hold a genuine grief. Homer is not capable of connecting these things. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive erosion, Homer's brain does not work in the way required to build the kind of structural analysis that would let him see the architecture of his own suffering. He is, in a precise and devastating way, too damaged to understand how he got damaged. And this is where the conspiracy becomes something more than a backstory detail. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally scarred in specific ways that made him the ideal employee. The desperate need for approval, the terror of abandonment, the willingness to remain in a situation that is objectively terrible rather than risk losing the stability that situation provides. Homer's psychological profile is precisely what Burns requires in the person responsible for maintaining his facility's most important operational advantage, which is the impression that someone competent is minding it. The show confirms this architecture in a later revelation. Burns had committed a crime that Grandpa Simpson discovered. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a permanent position at the plant. No matter how many errors Homer accumulated, and the show documents 742 of them, he would not be let go. Homer's job security is not a cartoon convenience. It is a contractual obligation between his father and the man who drove his mother underground, brokered in silence and maintained in secrecy, and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program. The billionaire retaliated by destroying her family. Her husband covered up the truth and made a deal with the enemy to protect his son's future. Her son grew up believing he was worthless, became cognitively impaired through environmental contamination and physical brain damage, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother away from him. 3 generations of Simpsons, shaped by one man's grudge. Mona died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer is there. He holds her hand. No joke, no reset, just a man and the mother he barely knew, and 30 years of stolen time pressing down on both of them. The comedy framework holds the grief the way a frame holds a window. You can see through it to what is actually there. Burns won. In this corner of Springfield's history, Burns won entirely. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made a deal and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never fully understood why his life felt heavy in the specific way it did. And Burns is still there, still running the plant, still signing Homer's checks, still the oldest and most powerful man in a town he has been poisoning for 60 years. Homer stands at the center of it, too damaged to see the pattern, too dependent to break free, strangling his son on the couch every evening in a house that runs on electricity generated by the same facility that poisoned his water and funded the empire of the man who stole his childhood. Burns didn't just take Homer's mother, he took Homer's potential. The man Homer could have been the man the crayon removal episode briefly showed us that man exists inside Homer's skull, trapped behind a crayon and a lifetime of radiation and a grief he has never been able to fully name because he has never been able to fully see its source. Homer chose to put the crayon back. But the choice was always rigged. Homer was never meant to be smart in Springfield. Burns made sure of that the night Mona walked away. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The town without a map. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name it than can name the capital of half the states in the actual country. It has a nuclear power plant and a tire fire and a gorge and a harbor and a monorail and a school and a prison and 2 hospitals and a convenience store that has become, in its own way, a cultural landmark. It has everything a town needs, except a location. Where is Springfield? This is the question the show has been entertaining and dodging and teasing and scrambling for 36 years, and the answer, to the extent one exists, is stranger than any specific state could accommodate. Springfield is in the north. It is also in the south. It borders Ohio. It also borders Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on the episode. It is coastal. It is also landlocked. It has mountain ranges in the background of outdoor scenes that contradict the weather patterns depicted in other episodes. It has experienced blizzards and tropical heat waves within the same season. Its area code starts with digits associated with Missouri. Its official state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which is not a real state. When Homer calls the state capital, The operator identifies the state as one that begins with a vowel, a clue that narrows the field slightly without resolving it. The show has been dropping and withdrawing geographic clues for its entire run. Every time a detail appears that seems to genuinely narrow the possibilities, another detail surfaces in a subsequent episode that directly contradicts it. The contradictions are too consistent to be accidental. The show is not failing to establish Springfield's location, it is actively maintaining Springfield's locationlessness. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He has acknowledged this in interviews, most notably a 2012 piece in Smithsonian Magazine. He said he chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, and because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery appeared to be solved. Springfield was in Oregon. The creators had confirmed it. Then the show continued airing with geographic details inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's confession. The contradictions resumed. The location slid back into ambiguity as if the interview had never happened. Because for the show, Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. Every viewer who grew up in a medium-sized American city, with a nuclear plant somewhere nearby, and a bar with a perpetually despondent clientele, and a school that never quite has enough money, recognizes Springfield. The specific location would narrow this, would make Springfield someone else's town rather than everyone's town. The geographic ambiguity is the mechanism by which Springfield remains universal. This is the surface-level explanation, and it is correct. Groening and the writers have confirmed it. Springfield is everywhere by design, because everywhere is the point. But then there is the theory-level explanation, which is darker and more specific. Under the radiation theory, Springfield's geographic impossibility is not a narrative device, but a symptom of the same contamination that affects everything else in the town. If the plant's radiation can alter biology, if it can produce three-eyed fish and mutated residents and a billionaire sustained by weekly nuclear treatments, why should geography be exempt? Maybe Springfield has mountains and ocean and desert within driving distance because the contamination has warped the physical landscape. Maybe radiation that bends the rules of biology eventually bends the rules of space as well, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. Under the coma theory, Springfield's geography makes even simpler sense. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise map of America. It has impressions, fragments, the memory of a vacation that involved mountains, a commercial that showed an ocean, a movie set in desert, farmland from a drive through the Midwest that blurred past at highway speed. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered, layered without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not have geographic logic. They have emotional logic. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memories of America, scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than cartography. Under the principle and the Popper theory, which we will discuss fully in the next section, Springfield's refusal to have a fixed location is the most practical expression of the town's systemic denial. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear facility if the state it operates in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means a fixed regulatory authority. Landing means consistent EPA oversight. Landing means a state attorney general with jurisdiction to ask questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the human skeletons in the basement. Floating means none of that. Floating means Burns's facility exists in a permanent state of regulatory ambiguity, which is, of course, exactly what Burns requires. The episode Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary episode from the 12th season, finally gave Springfield a location. In the original broadcast, the family is said to be from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The answer to the show's longest-running geographical mystery literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, the answer is not definitive. It shifts with the medium. Every state in the Union has been proposed as Springfield's home at some point. Every proposal has evidence in its favor and evidence against it. The ambiguity is so thoroughly maintained that it has become its own kind of certainty. Springfield will not be located. Not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided long ago that an unfindable town is the only town large enough to contain everything it needs to contain. The town that is everywhere is the town that belongs to everyone. And the town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down, cannot be regulated out of existence, cannot be placed under the jurisdiction of any single authority with the power to make it account for itself. Springfield will never be found on a map. And in that gap between where it should be and where it is, the entire show lives. Section 10. The Principal Who Wasn't. Springfield's Social Contract. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. This episode aired the 28th of September, 1997, and it has never been forgiven. The backlash was immediate and has never fully subsided. 28 years later, fans still cite this episode as the moment the show fundamentally changed. The moment the writers stopped caring about continuity. The moment the show betrayed its audience's trust in a way that permanently altered the relationship between the series and the people who loved it. But the fans have been reading the betrayal backwards. This episode did not break The Simpsons. It showed you what The Simpsons had always been, by doing in front of the camera what every other episode had done just off it. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds a celebration honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the event, a stranger enters. He is a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was believed killed in action after being captured as a prisoner of war. He survived. He escaped. He came home, and he discovered that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner for 20 years is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a kid from the wrong side of everything with no future and no prospects. He was drafted into the army. He served alongside the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt guilty. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth protecting, simply let it happen. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside the stolen identity for 20 years. And then the real Skinner walked through the door. Now here is what Springfield does. The town holds a meeting. The real Seymour Skinner is present. Armin Tamzarian is present. The truth is fully exposed and fully known to everyone in the room. And the town does not deliberate about prosecution. It does not organize a process for restoring the real Skinner to his identity. It votes on a simpler, more fundamental question, whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree stating that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived a POW camp and came home to find his life stolen, is physically tied to a railroad car and expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the truth again. Fans despise this. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner among other characters, publicly stated his displeasure. Critics argued that the episode destroyed 20 years of character history by revealing it was built on fiction. The episode ranks consistently among the most criticized in the series. But here's the thing nobody wants to sit with. The episode is completely honest about Springfield. It just says it out loud, for once. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. It has always agreed, collectively and implicitly, to forget whatever does not fit the agreed-upon version of events. The only thing unusual about the principal and the pauper is that it showed you the vote. It put the mechanism on screen. It let you watch Springfield formalize its denial, make it legal, back it with judicial authority, and remove the person who represented the inconvenient truth from the community physically. Every other time this happens in the show, it happens off-screen. The town experiences a catastrophe, and in the next episode, everything is normal and nobody mentions it. The dome comes down and the town is sealed, and then it is not, and nobody discusses it. The sun is blocked out and then unblocked, and life goes on. The resets are constant, continuous, and thoroughly depended upon by the show's narrative structure. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show let you watch the reset happen in real time, and audiences recognized something in it that made them deeply uncomfortable. Not because the episode was bad, because it was accurate. Consider the actual mechanism the episode reveals. Springfield resets after catastrophic events, not because of cartoon logic, not because of radiation damage, not because of a coma dream, but because the town chooses to reset, collectively, through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the comfortable fiction as truth and treat the uncomfortable truth as criminal, and anyone who insists on the truth will be removed from the community. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how communities function under pressure. Small towns particularly have a capacity for collective denial that researchers studying social psychology have documented extensively. Scandals get buried. Crimes get forgotten. The official version becomes the only version, not through conspiracy but through the ordinary human preference for stability over truth when the two are in conflict. Springfield is not a cartoon version of this tendency. Springfield is its pure expression. If the coma theory is correct, this episode takes on an additional dimension. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario where an entire town votes to sustain a lie, because Homer needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real if enough people agree to treat it as real. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the real one and never be called out, because that is what Homer's coma is. A fake life replacing a real one. A dream being treated as reality, maintained by a brain that keeps generating episodes to keep the fiction alive. And as long as nobody questions it, as long as the Dreamtown of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. The real Seymour Skinner was tied to a train and expelled. He is the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. He came in with proof that the official story was a lie, and the town's response was to criminalize the proof and exile the messenger. That is not a comedy beat. That is the show telling you exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality through consensus, through denial, through the systematic removal of anyone who threatens the version of events the community has agreed to accept. And once you see it operating here, you see it operating everywhere, in every reset, in every forgotten catastrophe, in every episode that begins as if the previous episode never happened. Springfield is not forgetting. Springfield is choosing. Over and over and over, across 36 seasons, it is choosing the story it can live with over the story that is true. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, tied to a train, exiled from his own life, the last honest man in a town that made honesty a crime, and Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. Section 11, Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the Hidden Tragedies. Let us talk about two characters who are, in some ways, the emotional extremes of Springfield. One of them is almost always dying, and the other one is almost always kind, and both of them are sadder than the show will ever quite admit. Hans Moleman first. If you have watched any meaningful amount of The Simpsons, you know Hans Moleman even if you do not know his name. He is the tiny, ancient, nearly blind man who shuffles through Springfield's background and exists primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars. He gets buried alive. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets eaten by animals. He gets incinerated, electrocuted, drowned, and struck by lightning. He walks into traffic. He disappears under vehicles. He falls through structures. He is, by conservative estimate, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. And he keeps coming back. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, where death is explicitly non-canonical. Not in dream sequences or fantasy segments, or any of the show's other acknowledged departures from its main narrative. In regular episodes, in canonical Springfield, Hans Moleman dies, and then he appears in the next episode as if nothing happened, and then he dies again. The cycle continues indefinitely. Most fans absorb this as a recurring gag, which is exactly what it is at the production level. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. Moving on. But Moleman himself, in one of the show's most quietly devastating throwaway lines, stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at Hans Moleman. He appears to be in his late 80s or 90s, if not older. He is visually among the most ancient appearing characters in the entire cast. His posture, his vision, his apparent frailty, everything about him reads as a man in the final years of a very long life. And the show tells you he is 31. If this is true and there is no in-universe reason to doubt it, then something took a man in his early 30s and aged him catastrophically. Something condensed decades of biological deterioration into what should have been the prime of his life. Something that also paradoxically made him nearly unkillable. He is ancient and he is fragile, and he dies constantly and he will not stay dead. The radiation theory has the most straightforward account of this. Someone with extreme radiation exposure might age rapidly through cellular damage while simultaneously developing the kind of biological abnormality, the mutation of healing processes, the alteration of normal cellular death cycles that makes a body extraordinarily resilient to conventional trauma. Moleman is aged and indestructible because whatever the plant did to him did both things simultaneously. It burned through his appearance while making his biology impossible to permanently shut down. The coma theory reads Moleman differently. He is a background process in Homer's dream. A minor character that Homer's unconscious mind does not maintain with the same consistency it applies to the central family. Moleman dies because the dream occasionally fails to keep track of a minor character, and comes back because the dream needs him there to populate the next scene. He is not a person in this reading. He is a prop that the dreaming mind breaks and reassembles with no particular awareness of the contradiction. The collective denial theory requires the least explanation for Moleman's situation. A man dies in public, repeatedly, in front of witnesses. Nobody investigates. Nobody calls for a formal inquiry. Nobody demands to know how this keeps happening. The town has extended the same consensus agreement it applies to everything else. The three-eyed fish, the glowing employer, the baby who shot a man, to include a tiny old man dying and returning every few weeks. It is simply accepted. Normalized. Filed under things we do not think about in Springfield. The death cycle is just another thing the town has decided not to see. Now let us talk about Ned Flanders, who is a different kind of tragedy entirely. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind, he is generous, he is devoutly, consistently, visibly religious. He is physically fit. He is financially responsible. He is a good father and a good neighbor. He is patient with Homer in ways that exceed any reasonable standard of tolerance and approach something that looks, from the outside, like genuine saintliness. And the show punishes him for it without mercy or reprieve. Maud Flanders, Ned's wife, was killed in a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway when a t-shirt cannon misfired and sent a projectile into the bleachers while Ned was in the row below. She was not the target. Homer was the target, and Homer dodged. And the shirts hit Maud instead. Homer's reflexive self-preservation caused the death of his neighbor's wife. Ned forgave him. Because that is what Ned does. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment and responds with grace. He has been doing this for 36 years. But the show revealed something about the nature of Ned's grace that changes how all of it reads. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it collapses immediately, Ned breaks. He has a complete psychological collapse, screaming at the town, saying things he has been holding inside for decades. And he is institutionalized. He is committed to a mental health facility. And there the show delivers the backstory that recontextualizes everything. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents were beatniks who did not believe in discipline, and whose approach to parenting produced a child who could not regulate his own behavior. They took him to a psychiatrist who spent years using behavioral modification to suppress the aggression. The treatment worked. The rage went away. The kindness that replaced it is not a character trait that emerged naturally from Ned's values. It is the result of intensive psychological conditioning applied to a child before he was old enough to consent to it. Ned's patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological. He cannot express anger because his brain was wired to suppress it at a fundamental level. His forgiveness of Homer after Maud's death is not grace. It is the programmed response of a man whose nervous system will not permit him to access the rage that the situation would produce in any unmodified human being. His faith is real in the sense that Ned genuinely believes, But it is also the coping mechanism of a man who needs an external framework, God's plan, God's design, God's will to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. The framework says that suffering is not random, that it serves a purpose, that good behavior will eventually be rewarded in some accounting that exceeds the one visible in his immediate circumstances. The problem within the show's own canon is that God actually exists in Springfield. God has appeared in the show. God has spoken directly to Homer Simpson in face-to-face conversations at least twice. Homer has received direct divine communication. The town drunk who falls asleep in church has a personal relationship with the creator of the universe. And God has never, in 36 seasons, spoken to Ned Flanders, the man who goes to church every Sunday, the man who has dedicated his entire life to faith, the man who prays and believes and obeys and suffers and forgives and has never once received in return the kind of direct communication God apparently has no difficulty providing to a man who once caused a nuclear incident with a donut. The show is being very specific here. It is not saying that God is absent or unknowable. It is saying that God, within Springfield's universe, is present and communicative, just not to Ned. The devout man who has earned every possible credential of faithfulness gets silence. The faithless man who earns nothing gets conversation. This is not random cruelty deployed for comic effect. It is a thesis statement about the relationship between moral behavior and cosmic reward in Springfield's universe. The system does not reward goodness. The system rewards compliance of a different kind, the compliance of someone so cognitively impaired by radiation or so emotionally damaged by loss that they simply keep showing up, keep working, keep absorbing whatever the town delivers, without the capacity for organized resistance. Homer is compliant because he is impaired. Ned is compliant because he was made to be, by a psychiatrist and by a faith that requires accepting suffering as part of a plan. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them, between the man who tries and the man who doesn't, has never once closed. Because in Springfield, that gap is not an accident. It is structural. The system produces both of them and keeps them exactly where they are. Homer at the plant, Ned at the church, Burns at the top, Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that does not break. That is Springfield. The man who does everything wrong and suffers nothing for it, next door to the man who does everything right and gets Maud taken away, and God's silence and a house rebuilt so badly it falls down. And both of them will be there next week, and the week after, and the week after that, because the loop does not break. It never has. It never will, unless something changes. Unless someone in Springfield finally sees clearly enough and is brave enough and has been waiting long enough behind her pacifier to decide that now is the moment. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Section 12. Everything connects. The final theory. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have traced the radiation from the cracked cooling towers through the water supply and into the biology of every yellow-skinned resident below. We have followed Homer into his coma and sat with the question of whether he ever came out of it. We have reopened the shooting case and found the official verdict wobbling on a foundation the show's own evidence does not fully support. We have tracked Burns's impossible lifespan to its mechanism, the weekly treatments, the disease equilibrium, the infrastructure of accumulated wealth engineered to keep one man alive indefinitely. We have watched Maggie observe everything behind her pacifier and declined to make assumptions about what she intends. We have examined the prediction phenomenon and concluded that 800 episodes of intelligent satire, filtered through the internet's confirmation bias, produces something that looks like prophecy but is actually expertise. We have followed Mona's trail from 1969 to her death, and traced the wreckage Burns caused across 3 generations of Simpsons. We have searched the map for Springfield and found it everywhere and nowhere. We have watched a town vote to criminalize truth and exile its messenger. We have sat with Hans Molleman's impossible 31 years and Ned Flanders' unanswered prayers. Every theory arrives at the same place from a different direction. Time does not work in Springfield. The characters do not age, the catastrophes do not leave permanent marks, the resets are constant and complete. Something has broken the normal flow of cause and effect for everyone who lives in this town. The radiation theory says the break is biological. The contamination has altered the residents at the cellular level, interfering with aging processes, impairing cognitive function, producing extraordinary physical resilience. The characters do not age because their biology has been fundamentally changed by decades of exposure to material. The plant has been leaking into their environment since before any of them were born. The coma theory says the break is perceptual. There is no Springfield. There is a hospital bed and a man lying in it, and a mind generating the most elaborate, most loving, most persistent dream in the history of human unconsciousness. The characters do not age because the dreaming brain cannot imagine them older than they were on the day it went to sleep. The collective denial theory says the break is social. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset through the unspoken agreement to not acknowledge what does not fit the story it has decided to tell about itself. The characters do not age because the community has agreed, through the same mechanism it used to exile the real Seymour Skinner, to treat time as something that applies to other places. The Burns immortality theory says the break is economic. If one person in Springfield has found a mechanism to extend his lifespan indefinitely through sufficient accumulation of resources, then the concept of normal aging is already negotiable in this universe. The rules are not fixed. They are available for purchase to those with the means. Different frameworks. Same conclusion. The town is exempt from certain fundamental rules, and every theory is an attempt to explain what produced the exemption. But here is what I think the theories are collectively pointing toward, beneath their individual arguments. Springfield is what we need it to be. Not what we need in the sense of desire, not exactly. In the deeper sense, the thing we organize our nostalgia around without quite naming it. The version of family life and community belonging and comfortable familiarity that we reached for at some point in our lives and found, and then watched begin to recede as time did what time does. As children grew and circumstances changed, and the world revised itself into something we had to learn rather than something we simply knew. The Simpsons has been on television for 36 years. People who were 8 years old when it premiered are in their mid-40s now. People who have children of their own who are already the age they were when they first watched. The world those people grew up in is substantially different from the world they inhabit now, in ways both obvious and impossible to fully articulate. The way the world always becomes different from the version you grew up inside of. And Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Homer is still stumbling through the door at 5:30 with the exact same quality of hapless optimism he had in 1989. Marge is still there, steady and patient and slightly exasperated and fundamentally, reliably, endlessly present. The house on Evergreen Terrace looks exactly the same. The couch is the same. The television in the living room plays the same static. The Simpsons does not age because we will not let it age, because letting it age means admitting that we have aged, that the era we associate with the show's early seasons is genuinely gone, that the children we were when we first watched it are people who exist now only in memory, that the world we grew up in has been revised into something new. As long as Bart is 10, we do not have to do that accounting. As long as the house on Evergreen Terrace looks the same, the home we associate with the feeling the show produces is still standing. The loop is not their prison, it is ours. We pressed pause on a Sunday night in 1989, or 1993, or 1998, wherever our own attachment to this show crystallized, and we have been maintaining that pause ever since, tuning in each new season to confirm that the family is still intact, the house still yellow, the town still humming with its particular quality of chaotic, affectionate disorder. Every theory in this video is a way of explaining why Springfield operates the way it does. But the deepest answer is the simplest one. Springfield operates the way it does because we need it to. Because the alternative, a Springfield where children age, where families change, where the house on Evergreen Terrace is eventually sold and someone else's furniture fills it, is a Springfield that admits something about time that we are not quite ready to admit. Homer's coma dream, if that is what it is, gives him his family preserved in amber. He cannot grow old with them, so he keeps them young. He cannot see them change, so he keeps them the same. He cannot know what they will become, so he keeps them as they were on the last day he saw them clearly. We do the same thing. Every time we queue up an episode, every time we quote a line from something that aired before half the current audience was born, every time we feel the particular comfort of the opening theme, the couch gag, the specific yellow of the Simpson family skin, We are doing what Homer's coma brain is doing. We are holding on. We are keeping the amber. The Simpsons is the longest-running scripted television show in American history. It has become, by virtue of that duration alone, something different from what it was. It is no longer simply a television program. It is a place you can go back to, a place that is always there when you return, a place where the children are always young, and the parents are always together, and the house always looks the same. You know this place. You have always known it. And if there is radiation in the water, and a comatose man dreaming it all into being, and a shooting that was never quite solved, and a billionaire who cannot die, and a baby planning something, and a mother who was taken away, and an imposter living a stolen life, and a tiny man dying and returning and dying again, and a good man whose prayers are never answered, and a town that has voted to forget everything inconvenient about its own existence. Well, that is what home is like, isn't it? When you look at it closely, when you look at anything closely, the miracle is not that it is strange. The miracle is that it is still there, that you can still go back to it, that after 36 years the door is still unlocked and the couch is still where it always was and the family is still inside. Maybe that is enough. Maybe for tonight that is more than enough. The sun is still blocked somewhere over Springfield. The plant is still running. Homer is still in Sector 7G or in his hospital bed or both, depending on which theory you find most true. Maggie is still watching. Burns is still alive. And the dream, or the town, or whatever you want to call the thing that The Simpsons has been generating for 36 years, is still running. It will still be running when you wake up. And if you are tired enough, and the hour is late enough, and you have been in Springfield long enough tonight, maybe it will find you in the space between waking and sleep. The town at the edge of the map, the family in the yellow house, the couch, the television, the theme song playing its way through the opening sequence one more time. Come home. It is still there. It always is. Good night. Sleep well. Subscribe if you want to come back, because there is always more. Springfield never runs out. That is the whole point. End of script. Section 1 extended. There is something worth pausing on before we go deeper into what Springfield is and what its mysteries mean. The floating timeline is not just an observation about the show's narrative structure. It is the founding condition of everything strange about Springfield. It is why all the theories that fans have built over 36 years of watching and rewatching and pausing on specific frames converge on the same underlying question. What is this town actually doing to the people inside it? And what is it doing to us, on the outside, watching? Let us stay with the timeline a little longer, because its implications unfold slowly and the full shape of them takes time to see. Consider what it means, concretely, for a child to be 10 years old for 36 years. Not in the abstract cartoon sense, but within the lived experience of Springfield as the theories construct it. Bart Simpson has been in the 4th grade since before most of his current audience was born. He has failed tests, gotten in trouble, ridden his skateboard through neighborhoods that have updated around him, and never once moved to the 5th grade. He is a permanent 10-year-old in a world that keeps aging around him. What does this do to a person? What does it do to a community to have its youngest generation permanently frozen at the ages they occupied at a specific historical moment? The children of Springfield will never grow up. They will never leave. They will never become the adults who make the decisions, challenge the systems, inherit and transform the town. The next generation of Springfield is stuck, not just frozen in a comfortable narrative sense, frozen in a way that serves the interests of the people who run Springfield very well indeed. A child who will never become an adult, will never vote, will never organize, will never look at the plant and ask, with the authority of a citizen and a taxpayer and a person who has lived in the contamination for a full adult lifetime, what exactly is in this water, and why do my children have 4 fingers? Burns does not need to worry about the next generation challenging him. The next generation is permanent children. This might be the most disturbing implication of the floating timeline, when you follow it far enough. Not that the characters don't age, that the specific people who don't age are exactly the people whose aging would represent a threat to the existing power structure of Springfield. Bart would grow into someone who has spent his entire life resisting authority and has developed, over 36 years of practice, a considerable expertise in it. Lisa would grow into someone who has spent her entire life seeing clearly, asking questions, and refusing to accept the comfortable answer. Maggie would grow into whatever it is Maggie is becoming behind the silence, and based on the evidence of what she is already capable of at 1 year old, the possibilities are significant. Burns's Springfield needs these people to stay children, and in Burns's Springfield, they always do. The adult characters present a different version of the same problem. Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s and have been in their mid-30s for 36 years. They are not aging into a perspective that might produce genuine challenge to the structures around them. They are not accumulating the specific kind of wisdom that comes from watching your children grow up, watching them leave, having the space in your life that was occupied by child-rearing fill with something else, something that might be clarity about the world you are actually living in. Marge has been the patient, stabilizing center of her family since the first episode. She has not had the life experience that would produce the particular kind of disillusionment that often generates radicalization. She is still in the phase where the family requires her. The phase where there is no bandwidth for anything beyond keeping the household functional and keeping Homer directed towards something that resembles responsibility. Homer has been slightly lost and fundamentally good-natured for 36 years. He has not accumulated the kind of sustained experience with the consequences of Burns's management of Springfield that would produce organized opposition. Each catastrophe resets. Each clear-eyed moment is erased. He remains in a permanent state of just getting by that leaves no cognitive or emotional surplus for the kind of sustained attention that might eventually add up to something dangerous. The floating timeline, viewed through this lens, is a perfect system. The children never grow up to challenge. The adults never accumulate enough sustained awareness to organize. The catastrophes never leave permanent marks. The town keeps cycling through variations of the same configuration, and the configuration always places the same people at the top and the same people at the bottom and the same cracked cooling towers leaking into the same water supply. Springfield's frozen time is not a gift to its residents. It is a constraint. And the constraint serves the people at the top of the town's power structure more completely than anything else in the show's universe. There is something else the floating timeline does that is worth examining before we move on to the specific mysteries of Springfield. It makes love possible in a way that time would otherwise foreclose. This is the emotional truth underneath the structural analysis. If Bart were to age, if he were to grow from 10 to 11 to 15 to 20, then the particular relationship he has with Homer would change. The dynamic of father and mischievous child, which is among the most pure and funny and genuinely affectionate relationships in the show, would transform into something more complex. It would gain depth and difficulty, and the particular tension between parents and adult children who have both changed in ways that require renegotiation. The floating timeline prevents this. It keeps Bart and Homer in the configuration where the love between them is most legible, most simple, most unambiguous despite all of Homer's failures and Bart's provocations. They are father and 10-year-old forever, and that specific version of the relationship is available every time you watch, unchanged, uncomplicated by the passing of time. The same is true for Homer and Lisa, for Homer and Marge, for Homer and Maggie. The floating timeline preserves each of these relationships in the state where they are most essentially themselves. Before the complications of adult change would introduce negotiations the show could not easily hold. The love is real. The frozen state makes it permanently accessible. And this is where the coma theory becomes genuinely moving rather than merely clever. If Homer is dreaming, if the dream is generated by a mind that went under in April 1993, then the floating timeline is not a narrative structure. It is an act of love so sustained and so complete that it has lasted 36 years and is still going. Homer's unconscious brain is keeping his family exactly as they were because he cannot bear to let them become something he cannot reach. He cannot grow old with them in the real world, so he keeps them from growing old in the dream. He preserves the configuration where the love is most immediately legible, and he runs it over and over, generating new scenarios, new adventures, new contexts for the family to inhabit, while the fundamental relationships at the center of it all remain untouched. Homer's coma dream is 36 years of a man who loves his family, keeping them safe in the only way available to him. That is the floating timeline. That is what all the contradictions and the violations of continuity and the impossible resets are when you follow them far enough down. Someone in a hospital bed who loves his family so much that he has been dreaming about them for longer than most of his audience has been alive. Hold on to that as we go deeper. It will come back. Section 2. Extended. The radiation theory requires us to do something that the show consistently discourages. Hold two things in mind simultaneously. The first is the comedy. The Springfield nuclear power plant is one of the great running jokes in American television history. The violations are absurd. The incompetence is spectacular. Homer eating donuts while meltdown warnings light up. The control panel is funny in a way that 3 decades of familiarity has not diminished. The show has earned the laughs and continues to earn them. The second is the logic. Everything the show depicts about the plant, if taken seriously within the show's own internal reality, describes something real and terrible. And the theory asks, what if we take it seriously? What if we hold the comedy and the logic in mind at once, and see what happens? What happens is Springfield. Let us trace the radiation's path through the town with the kind of attention the show rewards when you give it. The plant leaks into the water. This is established canon. The radioactive waste dumped into bodies of water is a documented violation. The water flows downstream through Springfield's watershed. It enters the groundwater. It comes out of taps. The people of Springfield drink it, cook with it, bathe in it, water their lawns with it, give it to their children. This is not speculation. The plant's waste is in the water, and the water goes everywhere. Now follow the water into the bodies of Springfield's residents and ask what happens there. Low-level chronic radiation exposure affects different tissues differently. The brain is among the most radiation-sensitive organs in the human body. Ionizing radiation damages the DNA in neurons, interferes with the myelin sheathing that allows nerve signals to propagate correctly, and over time, with sustained exposure, produces the kind of broad, diffuse cognitive impairment that looks from the outside like low intelligence, poor judgment, difficulty with sustained attention, impaired executive function. You get a population that is not unintelligent in the way that a single person might be born with a developmental limitation. You get a population whose collective intelligence is lower than it would be in the absence of the contamination. A population that can function, that can hold jobs and form families and maintain social structures, but that is systematically less capable of the sustained critical thinking required to look at their own situation and see it clearly. Homer's IQ of 55 is the most extreme expression of this effect in the show's central family. But consider that Homer is also the person with the most direct, sustained, continuous exposure to the plant's radiation. He works inside the facility. He is in proximity to the reactor for 40 hours a week. He has been doing this for decades. His cognitive impairment is not just the general population effect of drinking contaminated water. It is the amplified effect of someone living inside the source of the contamination during his working hours. And the show actually proves this with the crayon episode. When the crayon is removed, Homer becomes intelligent. Not somewhat more functional than usual, genuinely intelligent, capable of insight, able to understand and articulate complex ideas. His underlying intelligence is intact. Something is suppressing it. The show uses the crayon as a metaphor, a physical object lodged in his brain representing the obstruction. But the radiation theory suggests the metaphor has a literal correlate. Homer's intelligence is suppressed not just by a misplaced art supply, but by decades of direct exposure to ionizing radiation during the most cognitively significant years of his working life. The crayon is the story the show tells you. The radiation is the story underneath it. Now extend this to the population. If Homer represents the extreme case, the person with the most direct exposure, then the general population of Springfield represents the attenuated version of the same effect. Not IQ 55. But cognitively diminished in aggregate relative to what they would be in the absence of the contamination, in ways that are difficult to detect from inside the population and nearly invisible to people who have never known Springfield without the plant. This is why nobody looks at the three-eyed fish and draws the obvious conclusion, not because they are individually stupid, because the contamination has produced a population that is systematically less capable of the kind of sustained logical inference required to connect Blinky to their own bodies, their children's bodies, the water they drank this morning, the fish they ate last week. The capacity for that connection is exactly what decades of low-level radiation exposure impairs. The show has not made its characters unintelligent because it is making a joke about stupid people. It has made its characters cognitively impaired in a very specific way that the radiation theory maps onto actual documented effects of chronic low-level radiation exposure in human populations. Springfield is not a cartoon populated by dumb people. Springfield is a contamination zone populated by people whose thinking has been systematically impaired in the precise way required to prevent them from recognizing what is happening to them. Burns knows this. The show gives us this in the episode where the Germans purchase the plant and immediately identify the problems and immediately want Homer gone. Fresh eyes see what Springfield eyes cannot, because fresh eyes have not been drinking the water. The Germans are capable of looking at Homer and recognizing, instantly and unambiguously, that he is catastrophically unsuited to his role. They fire him. They begin addressing the violations. They nearly go bankrupt from the cost of compliance, which tells you how severe the violations are but also tells you something about Burns. He knows what compliance costs, he knows what the violations are worth to him, and he has made a calculated decision to maintain the violations because the violations maintain the conditions he requires. Burns repurchases the plant. Burns rehires Homer. The system returns to its optimal configuration. Every resident of Springfield who is not from Springfield is capable of seeing it clearly. Every person who arrives with uncontaminated cognition, who has been drinking clean water and breathing unirradiated air, looks at Homer and immediately recognizes the problem, looks at the plant and immediately recognizes the violations, looks at the town and sees, with the clarity that the locals do not possess, exactly what has happened here. And then they are integrated into Springfield. They drink the water, they breathe the air, and they begin to see it the way Springfield sees it, as normal. The radiation theory is not a metaphor for how power operates, though it works as one. It is, within the show's internal logic, a description of a specific causal mechanism by which a single billionaire has maintained control over an entire community for 60 years, not through overt force, not through surveillance, through chemistry. Through the invisible, odorless, tasteless substance leaking from his facility into the water that every person in town drinks every day, Burns does not need enforcers. Burns does not need to threaten anyone. The plant does the work. The plant has always done the work. Section 3 Extended. The coma theory rewards close attention to the specific texture of how the show changes after April 1993. Before the coma, The Simpsons had a quality of weight. Not heaviness. The early seasons are funny in a way the later ones often are not, with a precision and a timing that the writing staff has acknowledged came from a specific kind of discipline, a commitment to jokes that earned their place rather than jokes that filled space. But weight in the sense that the episodes had consequences that lingered. Homer's drinking affected his relationships in ways that the next episode remembered. Marge's anxiety about her marriage left traces. The financial stress of the family was continuous and real. These were not disconnected half-hours. They were episodes of an ongoing life. After the coma, the weight lifts. The show becomes lighter in a specific way, and the lightness is not just tonal, it is structural. Consequences no longer accumulate. The next episode does not remember what the previous episode established. The slate is clean at the start of each installment, regardless of what happened in the last. The family that was in crisis last week is fine this week. The relationship that was strained last week is intact this week. The disaster of the previous episode has been resolved so completely that it is as if it never occurred. Dreams work this way. You can be terrified, pursued, in crisis, falling, and then the scene changes and you are somewhere else entirely, and the terror of moments ago has no traction on the new moment. The continuity of waking experience, the accumulation of events into a coherent narrative moving through time, is absent in dreams. Each moment is internally coherent, fully realized in its own terms, and completely discontinuous with what came before. The post-coma Simpsons has this quality. Each episode is fully realized in its own terms. The logic is internally coherent within the episode's runtime. And then it ends, and the dream resets, and the family is whole, and the situation is stable, and whatever happened last week is gone. Homer's dreaming brain is very good at generating episodes. It has been practicing for 36 years. It has become extremely sophisticated at producing the texture of a life, the specific way Marge sounds when she is worried, the particular quality of Bart's mischief, the shape of Lisa's idealism, and its collision with the specific gravity of Springfield's institutional resistance to improvement. These are not vague impressions. They are rendered with precision and love and the accumulated knowledge of a man who has spent decades paying close attention to his family. But the dreaming brain cannot maintain continuity across episodes because continuity requires a continuous experiencing subject, someone who remembers yesterday and incorporates that memory into today. Homer's consciousness is interrupted at the level required for that kind of integration. He cannot carry the thread from last week into this week because the part of his brain that does that carrying is the part that the vending machine damaged. 5% gone, permanently. The 5% that makes experience cumulative rather than episodic. And so each episode is complete and then finished, and the family resets, and the dream begins again, and Homer gets to experience coming home to the people he loves one more time without the weight of everything that happened last time pressing on him. This is not, when you follow it far enough, a tragedy. It is a mercy. Homer has found, in the dream's incapacity for continuity, the one form of escape from consequences that his waking life never offered him. He cannot accumulate regret. He cannot dwell on the things he got wrong last week because last week, inside the dream, does not exist as a separate thing from now. Every episode is a fresh start. Every morning on Evergreen Terrace is the morning after a good night, rather than the morning after whatever catastrophe occurred last. The family is always intact because the dream keeps starting over before the damage can compound. If you have ever wished, even briefly, that you could press reset on your own life, go back to before a specific mistake, and start fresh from there, keeping what you love and releasing what went wrong, then you understand what Homer's coma gives him. It gives him the one thing his waking life could not. A family he can never lose, because the losing is always undone before it has time to stick. The celebrity appearances in later seasons deserve more attention than the theory usually gives them. Homer's hospital room has a television. This is not speculation. Hospitals have televisions in patient rooms. The television plays programs, news, talk shows, afternoon movies. The ambient media environment of a hospital room in the 1990s and 2000s and 2010s includes a rotating cast of cultural figures, musicians and actors and athletes and politicians and personalities whose faces and voices and names filter through the room's background noise and into whatever attenuated sensory processing Homer's comatose brain is still capable of. The brain, even in coma, is not entirely offline. Studies of comatose patients have consistently found that some level of sensory processing continues ambient sound, temperature, the voices of people in the room. The brain is taking in information. It is simply not able to do much with it in the ordinary way. Homer's dreaming brain does something with it. It takes the names and voices it absorbs from the television, a comedian whose show is playing, an athlete whose highlights are being discussed on sports radio, a musician whose song is audible from the room next door, and it incorporates them into the dream. It gives them faces consistent with the voices it has heard and places them in Springfield as characters, guest appearances. This is why the guest appearances become more frequent and more random in later seasons. Homer's hospital television has been playing for 36 years. It has cycled through decades of cultural figures. The longer the coma continues, the more fragments the dreaming brain has accumulated, and the more crowded Springfield becomes with people Homer has absorbed from the media environment around his unconscious body. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is actually a voice Homer heard through the fog of the hospital room, translated by a dreaming brain into a character who inhabits the one world Homer still has access to. And if you sit with this interpretation for a moment, really sit with it, something shifts in the way those guest appearances feel. They are not stunt casting. They are messages. They are the outside world sending fragments of itself to Homer through the only channel still available, and Homer's dreaming brain receiving them and weaving them into his story because even the dream knows, on some level, that the world outside is still moving, still there, still full of people and events and culture that Homer is missing. The dream cannot give Homer everything. It cannot give him the actual passage of time, the actual aging of his children, the actual experience of his family's lives unfolding in the real world outside the hospital. But it gives him what it can. It gives him the voices it hears. It gives him the names it catches. It gives him a Springfield that is as rich and populated and ongoing as the environment around his hospital bed, translated into the language of home. This is love in its most reduced and most essential form. A comatose brain keeping the simulation running not because it does not know it is a simulation, but because the simulation is all it has, and keeping it running is the only thing left that resembles staying. Section 4. Extended. The question of who shot Burns is more interesting than the question of what the answer is. The what Maggie officially is settled in the sense that the show has given it a settled answer and declined to revise it. The show committed to Maggie, and the writers have maintained that commitment in subsequent discussions and commentaries and interviews. The official answer is Maggie. But the how of the mystery, the way the question was constructed, the way the evidence was deployed, the way the contest was structured, and the alternate endings were produced, and the final scene of the episode was framed, tells you something about the show that is more interesting than the identity of any particular shooter. The show built a mystery that its own audience could not solve. This is not a criticism. Building a mystery that resists resolution is a sophisticated creative act. But the specific way this mystery resisted resolution reveals something about how The Simpsons was constructed at its peak, and about what the show understood about its own audience. The clues in Part 1 were not insufficient, exactly. They were too sufficient in too many directions simultaneously. The show was careful to give every significant character a plausible motive, a plausible opportunity, and a plausible personality profile consistent with committing the act. Homer had the most obvious surface-level motive, which is why he became the prime suspect in Part 2. But Smithers had the most intimate access and the most specific grievance. He was fired on the day of the shooting by the person he had devoted his life to, which is the kind of event that can crack even the most stable psychology. Marge had the most personal stake in terms of what Burns had done to her family. Even Grandpa had reason his retirement home was destroyed. The mystery was not constructed to have one obvious answer derivable from the clues. It was constructed to have multiple equally plausible answers, each supported by different combinations of the evidence, such that the audience's choice of suspect revealed something about how they weighted different types of evidence and different types of character motivation. It was a Rorschach test with a shooting at the center of it. Maggie as the official answer is, in this light, a choice that has a specific quality to it. It is the choice that forecloses all further consequence. A baby shot Burns. A baby cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot be interviewed, cannot provide testimony that would implicate others, cannot be held responsible in any way that would require the story to continue developing. Maggie as shooter is the answer that closes the story most completely. It is the answer that most thoroughly removes the event from the ongoing narrative of Springfield. Every other suspect, had they been officially identified as the shooter, would have required the story to continue. Homer being the shooter would have required a reckoning with his relationship with Burns, and with his employment, and with the Mona conspiracy. Smithers being the shooter would have required a reckoning with 20 years of complicated devotion and what happens to Burns's infrastructure when his closest manager is removed from it. Marge being the shooter would have required a reckoning with what Marge knows about her own capacity for action when her family is threatened. Maggie as the shooter requires nothing. Case closed. Baby did it. Nobody is held responsible. Everything continues exactly as it was. Springfield's social contract at its most pure. The answer that causes the least disruption. The answer that requires the least change. The answer that allows everything to reset most cleanly. And the final shot, Maggie alone in the empty room, checking she is unobserved, moving her pacifier in the trigger motion contains within it both of the readings the theory proposes. If Maggie did it, she is demonstrating a level of self-awareness and strategic thinking about the event that is inconsistent with an infant who fired a gun accidentally during a struggle over a lollipop. She is checking that she is unobserved before reenacting the event privately. She is doing what a person does when they know that what they are doing is something they should not be seen doing. This is not a baby accidentally imitating something she saw. This is a baby who understands that the gesture she is about to perform is connected to something she should not perform in public. If Maggie did not do it, if she witnessed the shooting rather than committing it, then the gesture reads differently. She saw something. The motion is in her memory. She is processing it in the way that young children process significant events they have witnessed, by imitating them in a safe, private context. The checking of her surroundings before doing it is the caution of a child who has learned, from the event she witnessed, that this particular action has serious consequences and should not be performed where adults can see. Both readings are consistent with the evidence. Both readings are consistent with what we know of Maggie's character. The show constructed the final shot to hold both possibilities in genuine suspension, and it has been holding them there for 30 years. The greatest mystery in the show's history was never actually solved. It was closed. In Springfield, those have always been different things. Section 5 Extended. Let us follow Burns through time and see what the accumulation of his years actually looks like when you map it against history. Burns has described the Gilded Age as personal experience. He was there in the late 1800s, when the first great American fortunes were being constructed on the backs of labor forces with no protection, and in industries with no regulation, and through practices that later generations would recognize as the foundational violence of American capitalism. He participated in this. His family's wealth predates it, but the expansion of that wealth into what it became happened during this period, and Burns was present for it. He attended Yale. This places him in New Haven at some point in the late 1800s or very early 1900s, depending on the episode's internal dating. Yale in that era was a particular kind of institution, not just an educational facility, but a network, a web of connections among the families who were accumulating and consolidating the power that would shape American politics and industry for the next century. Burns was part of this network from its earliest formations. He has had a century to cultivate and maintain those connections, to call in favors across generations, to build the kind of relational infrastructure that ordinary wealth cannot purchase. He served in World War II. The show depicts his wartime role as morally compromised in ways it declines to specify in detail, but the implication is that Burns used the war's chaos and the government's need for industrial production to accumulate advantage in ways that a person of normal conscience would have declined. He came out of the war with a $1 trillion bill, a denomination that does not exist in actual U.S. currency, suggesting that even the show's depiction of Burns's wealth operates at a scale that ordinary financial instruments cannot accommodate. He kept this bill hidden for decades, which is itself a statement about his relationship to ordinary economic accountability. He does not need the money. He needs the symbol. He knew Howard Hughes. Hughes is himself one of American history's most extraordinary figures in terms of the extremes his life reached. Extraordinary wealth, extraordinary innovation, extraordinary psychological deterioration, extraordinary attempts to control the conditions of his own existence and ultimately his own death. Burns knew him. The show establishes this as a personal acquaintance, not a historical awareness. Burns has a file on Hughes. Burns attended the same circles. This is the biography of a man who has not merely witnessed American history, but shaped it. Not through the visible actions that end up in textbooks, but through the invisible weight of sustained wealth and sustained influence applied continuously across a span of time that encompasses multiple generations of everyone else. While other people were being born and growing up and growing old and dying, Burns was there. While entire dynasties rose and declined around him, Burns persisted. While the political landscape transformed from Gilded Age plutocracy to progressive reform, to New Deal democracy, to Cold War consensus, to the particular configurations of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Burns was present for all of it, adapting, maintaining, ensuring that each new configuration of power left room for him. This is what a century of sustained, actively managed immortality produces. Not just an old man who has accumulated a lot, a man who has had time to build a system so comprehensive, so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of Springfield and of American power more broadly, that the system has taken on a life of its own. Burns does not have to actively maintain his position in Springfield the way a normal billionaire might need to. The position maintains itself. The plant provides the power provides the revenue funds the treatments maintain Burns owns the plant. The system is closed and self-sustaining. Springfield's economy depends on Burns's plant. Burns's plant depends on its violations to remain economically optimal. The violations depend on Homer's incompetence to go unaddressed. Homer's incompetence depends on the contamination that has impaired his cognitive function. The contamination comes from the plant. which Burns owns. Which produces the revenue that funds the treatments that keep Burns alive to own the plant. Every element of this circle is load-bearing. Remove one and the others become unstable, which is why nothing changes, which is why everything resets, which is why the catastrophes that should force structural change never quite manage to produce it. The system has been running for 60 years and has survived everything the plot has thrown at it because the plot exists inside the system and the system determines the plot's ultimate outcomes. Burns does not need to worry about any given episode's events permanently threatening his position because the structure that positions him cannot be meaningfully challenged by any single event within it. The show can tell you that Homer accidentally caused a nuclear incident, and the next episode the plant is running and Homer is at his station and Burns is in his office. The show can tell you that the EPA sealed Springfield under a dome, and eventually the dome comes down and the plant is running and Burns is in his office. The show can tell you that Burns was shot by a baby and lay in a coma in the hospital, and the entire town spent a summer wondering if he would survive. And Burns survived, and the plant is running, and Burns is in his office. This is the true measure of Burns's immortality. Not that his body cannot be killed, it nearly has been, multiple times, but that the system he built is stable enough that not even his temporary incapacitation disrupts it. The plant runs without him. The revenue accumulates. The treatments are standing orders. Smithers maintains the schedule. Burns can be shot, hospitalized, sent into temporary chaos, and the machinery of his empire continues operating in his absence because he has built it to function without requiring his continuous, conscious direction. This is what a century of planning looks like. Not paranoia, not obsession, but the patient, thorough construction of a system so robust that the death of its architect would not stop it. The system would simply continue. Someone would inherit it, or it would run on institutional inertia, or it would find a new figurehead. The machine would keep going. Burns has not built an empire. He has built a perpetual motion device that generates wealth and power in sufficient quantities to maintain itself indefinitely, and he lives at the center of it, sustained by its outputs, directing its direction with the specific kind of authority that only a century of accumulated context and relationship can provide. Springfield is a component of this device. The people of Springfield are its fuel. Their water is the mechanism of their compliance, and Burns is the engineer who designed the mechanism and has been maintaining it for 60 years. And it keeps running. It always keeps running. Section 6 extended. There is a specific quality to Maggie's silence that becomes clearer the longer you look at it. It is not passive. That is the key thing. The silence of most infants is the silence of a being who does not yet have the architecture for language, who is absorbing the world, building the neural connections that will eventually produce speech, learning the mapping between sounds and meanings that makes communication possible. It is the silence of becoming. It points forward to a moment when the silence will end. Maggie's silence does not point forward. It points inward. It has, over 36 years of episodes, developed the specific quality of a strategic choice rather than a developmental phase. It has the texture of decision. Consider the moments when Maggie communicates without language. She does not use the blunt, undifferentiated expression of an infant who has not yet learned to refine her signals. She uses gesture with precision. She uses facial expression with nuance. She uses her pacifier as an instrument of punctuation, the specific motion of it, communicating specific things to specific people at specific moments. People around her understand what she is communicating. They interpret her correctly, consistently. The family responds to Maggie's nonverbal communication as if it were perfectly legible, because it is. Maggie has developed a complete, functional communication system that does not require speech. This is not what developmental delay looks like. Developmental delay produces frustration, a being that wants to communicate and cannot, that has the drive for expression and lacks the tools. What Maggie demonstrates is something different. She has the tools. She has chosen different tools. The absence of speech is not a failure of development. It is a design choice. Why would an intelligent being choose not to speak? The theory says, because Lisa showed her what speaking gets you. But let us go further into this, because there is a layer of the theory that is usually glossed over in the summary version. Lisa is not merely undervalued in Springfield. Lisa is actively disadvantaged by her intelligence in ways that go beyond social rejection. Her intelligence makes her a target. It makes her a challenge to authority structures that have a material interest in not being challenged. Her clarity about Springfield's problems makes her, within the show's internal logic, a kind of existential threat to the systems that depend on the population's limited awareness of those problems. And the show systematically defeats her. Every campaign Lisa undertakes, environmental, social, educational, political, meets resistance that ultimately proves insurmountable. Not because she is wrong, she is almost always right, but because the structural forces she is challenging are embedded in Springfield's economy and Springfield's psychology in ways that individual intelligence and individual effort cannot dislodge. Lisa keeps trying anyway. This is her defining characteristic, the refusal to accept defeat despite its consistency, and it is admirable. And it is also, from Maggie's perspective, a pattern of consistently costly behavior that produces consistently minimal results. Maggie, who has been watching this for 36 years, has drawn a different conclusion. Not that the problems Lisa identifies are not real, not that resistance is wrong, but that visible resistance, announced resistance, the kind of resistance that operates through speech and argument and public engagement with the systems being challenged, is maximally costly and minimally effective in Springfield. The radiation has already compromised the population's capacity for the sustained critical thinking that would allow Lisa's arguments to gain traction. The collective denial mechanism ensures that any truth that threatens the status quo gets routed around and neutralized. The social contract penalizes truth speakers with the specific, community-level ostracism that the real Seymour Skinner experienced. In this environment, Maggie's strategic silence is not timidity. It is the most sophisticated analysis of the available options that any character in the show has produced. Do not speak. Do not be noticed. Do not give the system a target to route around. Instead, watch, learn, build a complete understanding of how the system operates, who its pressure points are, where its dependencies concentrate, and wait. Wait for the moment when the accumulated understanding can be applied in a context where the system's routing mechanisms cannot respond in time. Wait for the specific configuration of circumstances that makes the action possible before the resistance can organize. And then act quietly, in the margins, and be gone before anyone has figured out what happened. We have seen glimpses of this operating across the show's run. The shooting, the daycare rebellion, the multiple rescues of family members from situations that would have been insoluble by any other member of the household. Each time, the action is taken before anyone could predict or prevent it. Each time, the result is decisive. Each time, Maggie returns to the default state of placid, apparently helpless infancy, and the family moves on without examining what just happened. This is strategy at a level that the show's other characters do not approach, Lisa argues. Maggie acts. Lisa announces her intentions and then pursues them in the face of organized opposition. Maggie identifies the target, identifies the moment, and moves before the opposition can organize. 36 years of watching everything in Springfield has given Maggie a complete map of the town's vulnerabilities. She knows where Burns's system is load-bearing and where it is merely ornamental. She knows which relationships could be leveraged and which are too corrupted to be useful. She knows the difference between the catastrophes that will reset and the actions that might not. The show has not yet shown us what Maggie does with this knowledge. It has been building toward a moment of revelation for 36 years, generating the question in every episode where Maggie watches something happen with those enormous absorbing eyes. And when the moment comes, if the moment comes, it will be quiet. It will be efficient. It will be over before Springfield knows what hit it. And then Maggie will put the pacifier back in her mouth and wait to see what happens next. Section 7 Extended. The confirmation bias engine that produces the prediction phenomenon deserves more careful examination than it usually gets because the mechanism is more interesting than simply saying people remember the hits and forget the misses. What the internet does with Simpsons predictions is something quite specific. It curates. It selects from the enormous archive of the show's output the moments that align with documented subsequent events and presents them as a coherent highlight reel. The presentation is temporal. First, the Simpsons clip, then the news headline in a way that implies causation or, at minimum, foreknowledge. The show depicted X. X happened. Therefore, the show predicted X. The curation step is invisible. You do not see the thousands of Simpsons moments that would have been equally compelling if events had broken differently. You do not see the episode that depicted a female president before a male celebrity president, which would have been the prediction highlight if the 2016 election had gone the other way. You do not see the episodes depicting technologies that were imagined and never developed, the political scenarios that were satirized and never materialized, the social trends that were identified and then reversed. The prediction highlights are not a representative sample of the show's predictive accuracy. They are the best performing minority of a much larger set, selected after the fact by the criterion of accuracy. If you run this process on any sufficiently large corpus of satire about contemporary American life, you will produce a similar highlight reel. The process does not require prophecy. It requires volume and time. But the meta question is interesting. Why does the prediction narrative persist even among people who understand the confirmation bias explanation? Why does it feel meaningful even to people who can articulate exactly why it should not? The answer, I think, is that the predictions are not really about prediction. They are about the feeling of recognition that occurs when a piece of fiction and a piece of reality align in a specific way. When the Trump clip surfaces alongside the 2016 election coverage, the feeling produced in the viewer is not "The Simpsons knew." The feeling is, of course. The feeling is a specific kind of familiarity, not with the Simpsons clip, but with the reality it aligns with. The reality, having been pre-depicted by fiction that many people absorbed years earlier, arrives already narrativized, already embedded in a story that makes sense of it, already placed in a satirical framework that gives the viewer a position to occupy in relation to it. The prediction does not actually tell you anything you didn't know. It gives you a frame for what you are watching. It tells you, this is the kind of thing that gets satirized. This is recognizable as part of a pattern. This is not unprecedented. Someone saw this coming, even if this was not exactly what they saw coming, and even if coming means 30 years of anything being possible eventually. This is the cultural function the show actually performs, not oracle, contextualizer, frame provider. The show gives the audience a pre-existing narrative structure into which contemporary events can be slotted, and the slotting produces the sensation of recognition rather than surprise. Reality catches up to the satire, and the catching up feels like confirmation, which it is, in a sense. Not confirmation that the writers knew, confirmation that the patterns they identified were real patterns that continued operating. The Cypress Hill London Symphony Orchestra example is worth dwelling on because it is so specific and so recent. In 1996, the show depicted this exact collaboration as an accidental, chaotic, drug-induced booking error. The joke was built on the absurdist gap between the two performers, the contrast between hip-hop and classical music, the specificity of the performers named, the particular combination of Cypress Hill and the LSO operating as the punchline. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, deliberately in celebration of their catalog. There are a few ways to read this. The simplest is the confirmation bias reading. One specific joke among thousands happened to align with a real event 28 years later. Nothing supernatural required. But there is another reading that is worth holding alongside the first. The Simpsons, in making this joke in 1996, introduced the idea into the cultural conversation. The specific combination Cypress Hill, London Symphony Orchestra became a referenced thing, a pop culture artifact. People who worked in music knew the joke. When the question of interesting collaborations arose in whatever meeting produced the 2024 concert, the idea of Cypress Hill with a symphony orchestra had a pre-existing cultural presence that made it feel, to the people proposing it, less like a bizarre new idea and more like something that had always been on the table. The joke did not predict the collaboration. The joke may have contributed to the conditions that made the collaboration imaginable. This is the most sophisticated version of the show shapes the future argument, and it applies more broadly than a single example. The Simpsons has been part of the cultural environment in which decisions are made for 36 years. The scenarios it depicted, the combinations it named, the futures it satirized, have all been present in the ambient cultural awareness of the people who make decisions about politics and entertainment and technology and economics. The show's satirical imaginings are part of the landscape within which those people operate. Some of what they imagine and eventually do was pre-shaped by a cartoon that told them, years earlier, that this kind of thing is the kind of thing that happens. Springfield is not a prediction machine. Springfield is a cultural mirror. And when you hold a mirror up to a society for long enough, the society begins to resemble what the mirror shows it, because the mirror is part of the environment that shapes the society. The show wrote the future not because it knew what the future would bring, but because the future was written by people who had all watched the show. Section 8 Extended. The Mona conspiracy has implications that extend beyond the Simpson family into something that sits at the center of Springfield's political economy. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, while simultaneously owning a nuclear power plant in Springfield. These are not separate facts about a man with diverse business interests. They are evidence of a specific disposition toward the community he inhabits. Burns does not see Springfield as a place he lives. He sees it as a resource he owns. The people of Springfield are not his neighbors. They are his supply chain. The biological weapons lab existed to produce weaponized pathogens. In Springfield, a town with a school and a retirement home and a neighborhood where children play and people go about their lives with no awareness of what is being manufactured half a mile away. Burns was producing weapons-grade biological agents in the same geographic space where he was also exposing the population to radioactive contamination through the plant's violations. The town was simultaneously a nuclear contamination zone and a location for biological weapons production. When Mona and her group destroyed the lab, Burns's response was not legal escalation. He did not call the police and have them arrested. He reported Mona to the FBI on charges that would make her a federal fugitive, not a local criminal. He engaged the apparatus of the federal government against a woman who had destroyed his illegal biological weapons program. Think about what this requires. Burns had to have a relationship with federal law enforcement of sufficient depth to weaponize it against a private citizen on the basis of his personal grievance. The FBI came. The FBI pursued Mona for 27 years. The FBI, a federal agency with national jurisdiction and national resources, maintained an active interest in a Springfield housewife who had participated in the destruction of a biological weapons laboratory because Burns had a relationship with the agency that made this possible. What kind of man has this relationship? The kind who has been building it for decades. The kind who provided industrial production capacity during wartime that the government could not have obtained otherwise. The kind who held a $1 trillion bill, a denomination the government itself issued as a bargaining chip. The kind who has had a century to cultivate precisely the government relationships required to make federal agencies serve his personal interests when he needs them to. Burns is not just Springfield's most powerful resident. He is connected, through relationships built over a century, to power structures that extend far beyond Springfield. The town is his base. His reach extends everywhere, and this reach destroyed a family. Homer's psychological profile, the desperate need for approval, the terror of abandonment, the inability to sustain the kind of self-directed ambition that would allow him to challenge his circumstances, is the direct product of what Burns did to his family when Homer was 6 years old. A 6-year-old boy woke up and his mother was gone and his father told him she was dead, and he spent the next 3 decades organizing his emotional life around the trauma of that loss. The specific psychological damage this produces is precisely what Burns requires in his safety inspector. Homer is not just incompetent in ways that allow the violations to continue. He is emotionally configured to remain in place despite conditions that should prompt him to leave. He will not quit. He will not organize resistance. He will not build the kind of sustained opposition that a person with a healthier psychological foundation might develop over 30 years of working in a dangerous facility for a demonstrably malicious employer. Homer stays because leaving means being alone. Because losing the job means losing the structure. Because the structure, the plant, the familiar complaints, even Burns's inability to remember his name is stable, and stability, to a person whose foundational stability was destroyed at age 6 by the abrupt and unexplained disappearance of his mother, is worth nearly any cost. Burns designed this. The show confirms it with the Grandpa deal. The deal that guaranteed Homer's employment regardless of performance was not an act of charity or guilty conscience. It was an investment. Burns paid for an incompetent safety inspector using currency he had available, a promise of employment, and received in return exactly what he needed. A person whose psychological profile and whose workplace performance combined to ensure that the plant's violations would never be seriously addressed. Homer's job security is not the result of Burns being sentimental or forgetful. It is the result of Burns being very, very good at recognizing what he needs and arranging to have it. And Abe's deal is its own tragedy within the tragedy. Abe discovered something about Burns that constituted leverage. Abe had a moment, perhaps the only moment anyone in Springfield has ever had, where he possessed information that could have been used to hold Burns accountable, to extract meaningful concession, to potentially expose what Burns had done to his family. And Abe traded it for a job guarantee for his son. He did not expose Burns. He did not use the leverage to free Mona. He did not seek justice for his wife or his family. He made a private deal that secured Homer's future and buried everything else. He traded the truth for a steady paycheck. And then he buried the truth so deeply that Homer never knew there was a deal, never knew there was leverage, never knew that the thing that could have changed everything had already been exchanged for something much smaller. 3 generations, all of them shaped by one man's decision to pursue a personal grudge across decades. The grandmother who fought back and lost everything, the grandfather who had the leverage and spent it on safety, the father who inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt heavy in the specific place it did. Burns took Homer's potential. He took it before Homer was old enough to know he had it, through the chain of cause and effect that started with Mona's decision to stop and help someone in the chaos of the lab raid, and the face Burns put with that decision, and the grudge Burns decided to carry. One moment of compassion, one face seen at the wrong moment, 30 years of consequences, and Homer standing at his workstation every day of those 30 years, under the shadow of the same cracked cooling towers, drinking the same contaminated coffee, receiving the same paycheck signed by the same man, without the cognitive capacity or the emotional architecture to connect the dots. Section 9 Extended. The geography question rewards lateral thinking. Every American city has some version of what Springfield represents. Every city has a neighborhood that the rest of the city barely visits, but that is clearly identifiable as the kind of place that was once industrial and is now something else, or was once suburban and grew into urban, or was once rural and found itself annexed into sprawl. Every American city has a place with a school whose funding is always slightly insufficient, a bar whose regulars have been there since before anyone can remember, a factory or plant or industrial facility at its edges whose presence most residents have simply accepted as part of the landscape. Springfield is the distillation of these places, not any specific one. The common elements, the things that make an American town feel like an American town rather than a European city or an Asian metropolis or any of the other configurations that human settlement takes elsewhere. This is the intentional design. But the intentional design has a specific effect on how the show functions that goes beyond making it universally recognizable. It makes Springfield impossible to visit from the outside. There is no Springfield, Oregon, or Springfield, Illinois, or Springfield, Missouri that you can go to and say, this is it. This is the source material. This is what Matt Groening was actually drawing. Every Springfield in America that claims the show as its own is claiming something it genuinely has standing to claim, and so is every other Springfield. The town exists in the negative space between all of its real-world counterparts. This has a specific implication for accountability. Not in the conspiracy theory sense, but in the narrative sense. A show set in a specific real place has specific real obligations. It can be checked against the reality of that place. Its geography can be verified. Its cultural details can be measured against the actual culture of the actual location. A show set in Springfield can be checked against nothing, because Springfield does not correspond to any single reference point precise enough to catch its contradictions. This freedom is part of what has allowed the show to run for 36 seasons. A show specifically set in, say, Detroit in 1989 would carry all the weight of that specific historical moment and that specific geographic reality. The stories it could tell would be constrained and shaped by the truth of that place. Springfield carries none of this weight. It can be whatever the story requires. It can be northern or southern, coastal or landlocked, snowy or tropical, Rust Belt or Sun Belt, depending on what the episode's comedy or drama demands. And crucially, it can be wrong about itself without anyone being able to definitively prove it. The geographic uncertainty is, among other things, a form of narrative sovereignty. The show owns its own reality in a way that a geographically specific show cannot. When the Simpsons are in Springfield, the rules of Springfield apply, not the rules of any real American city, not the rules of Oregon or Missouri or Kentucky. Springfield's rules, which are, as the show has established over 36 seasons, whatever the show needs them to be. This is not dishonesty. It is a specific creative choice that has specific creative consequences. One consequence is the universal recognition. Another is the freedom from external fact-checking. Another, more interesting, is that the show has been able to establish its own internal consistency. Springfield's rules, Springfield's history, Springfield's geography as Springfield understands it without reference to any external standard. Springfield's geography is impossible by the standards of real American geography, but it is perfectly consistent by the standards of Springfield geography. There are mountains because there have always been mountains. There is ocean because there has always been ocean. The irradiated gorge and the tire fire and the monorail and the tire fire are where they have always been, in relation to each other, in a space that does not correspond to any map, but is completely navigable by anyone who has spent time there. The coma theory finds this significant. Homer's dreaming brain assembles Springfield from memories and impressions, rather than from precise geographic knowledge. The result is a place that is emotionally accurate, that feels like the places Homer has been, that contains the features he associates with home and community, and the specific texture of American working-class life without being cartographically accurate. This is exactly how memory works. The places you know most intimately are not maps in your head. They are impressions. They are the feeling of the route more than the precise coordinates. The specific quality of the light in a particular neighborhood at a particular time of day, the smell of a specific block, the relationship between landmarks in a way that is navigable without being precisely mappable. Homer's Springfield is a memory palace built from impressions. It is accurate in the ways that matter to Homer. The bar is where it should be, the plant is at the edge of things the way it always was, the school is reachable on a bicycle in the time a 10-year-old would need, and not accurate in the ways that do not matter to Homer, which is everything about physical geography beyond the emotional texture of the town he grew up in. You cannot find Springfield on a map because Springfield is in Homer's head, and Homer's head does not contain maps. It contains something more accurate than maps. The feeling of being home. Section 10, Extended. The town meeting and the principal and the pauper is one of the most important scenes in the show's history, and it deserves more attention than the episode's critical reputation has allowed it to receive. What happens in that meeting is not just that Springfield votes to maintain a lie. What happens is that Springfield demonstrates a mechanism that the town has been using for 36 years, in every episode, in every reset, in every forgetting of every catastrophe, and does so in full view of the audience for the first time. The mechanism is consensus reality production. This is a term from social psychology describing the process by which communities establish shared understandings of what is true, what is real, and what is acceptable to say out loud. It is not conspiracy. It does not require a central organizing authority directing everyone to believe the same thing. It is an emergent property of social systems under pressure. Groups of people who share a situation and a set of interests will tend, without explicit coordination, to converge on the version of reality that best serves those shared interests. Springfield's shared interest is stability, not justice, not truth, not the well-being of individuals whose interests might conflict with the group's comfort. Stability, the ongoing day-to-day continuation of the arrangements that allow the town to function. The plant provides power. The power enables the economy. The economy enables the food and the shelter and the social structure that allows people to live their lives. Any serious disruption to this chain is, from the perspective of the individuals dependent on it, an existential threat to their daily existence. So when a truth arrives that would produce such disruption, a truth like the identity of the principal being false, or the water being contaminated, or the fish having 3 eyes, or the billionaire who owns the plant having a biological weapons lab in town, the social system routes around it, not through conspiracy. through the ordinary, continuous, low-level process by which communities decide what is acceptable to notice and what is acceptable to ignore. The Principal and the Pauper shows you this process in its explicit, formalized form. The vote, the judicial decree, the physical expulsion of the truth-bringer. These are extreme versions of what normally happens informally, at the level of social pressure and community discourse, and the gentle but persistent discouragement directed at people who insist on saying things the community has decided not to hear. Every time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, you are watching the informal version of the vote in The Principal and the Pauper. No formal meeting is called. No judge issues a decree, but the social consensus operates. This did not happen in a way that we need to carry forward. This can be set aside. The episode is over, and we do not need to reference it next week. This is how the floating timeline is maintained without a conspiracy. Nobody is organizing the forgetting. The forgetting organizes itself, because forgetting is what the town's social system selects for. The residents who forget are comfortable. The residents who remember are uncomfortable and make others uncomfortable and are, through the ordinary mechanisms of social exclusion, encouraged to stop making others uncomfortable. Tamzarian is a specific, dramatic instance of a thing that is happening continuously at lower levels of visibility throughout Springfield. He is the extreme case, a lie so large and so well established that when the truth arrives, the truth is simply too disruptive to be tolerated. The real Skinner's return is not just inconvenient. It threatens 20 years of established relationships, established institutional arrangements, established expectations about who Skinner is and what his relationship to the town means. The cost of the truth is higher than the cost of the lie. So the town pays the cost of the lie and exiles the truth. And the audience watched this and called it the worst episode of the series. Which is interesting, because what the audience was reacting to was not the implausibility of the scenario. Small towns do things very similar to this all the time. The audience was reacting to the discomfort of watching the mechanism made explicit, of seeing, in clear and unavoidable terms, the process by which comfortable fictions are maintained at the expense of uncomfortable truths. It felt like a betrayal because it was accurate. It felt like the show had stopped caring about its characters because the show was demonstrating, in the clearest possible terms, what its characters and their community actually are. Springfield is a town that has decided, repeatedly and consistently and collectively, that the truth is less important than the story. That the real Skinner is less valuable than the Skinner the town has grown accustomed to. That the real level of contamination from the plant is less important than the status quo. That the real identity of who shot Burns is less important than the answer that closes the case without disrupting anything. The real Seymour Skinner is Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He arrived with proof. The proof was true, and Springfield expelled the proof and expelled the man who carried it and made it illegal to ever mention either again. And then the next episode began, and Springfield was exactly the same as it always was, and nobody mentioned the real Seymour Skinner, and the floating timeline continued its float, and the town chose its story over its truth one more time, as it always does, as it always will. Section 11 Extended. Hans Mollman's stated age of 31 is the detail that the show drops most casually and most devastatingly. He says it in passing, in a scene that is not constructed to draw attention to the specific number, in a tone that suggests it is simply a biographical fact he is reporting. He is 31 years old. The comedy, such as it is in the gap between the number and what we see. The body in front of us looks ancient. The number says young. But what if the gap is the point? The radiation theory holds that the plant's contamination affects Springfield's residents in ways that are biologically significant and individually variable. Homer's mutation manifested primarily as cognitive impairment. Maggie's manifested as cognitive enhancement. What if Mollman's mutation manifested as accelerated aging? Accelerated biological aging is a documented phenomenon in human medicine, associated with specific genetic conditions, and also with some forms of environmental stress. A body exposed to significant radiation may experience cellular aging at a rate faster than the calendar's rate. The DNA damage accumulates faster. The cellular repair mechanisms are overwhelmed faster. The tissues age faster. The person looks and feels and eventually becomes older than their chronological years. If Molman is 31 in chronological terms and looks 90 in biological terms, his body has aged at roughly 3 times its normal rate. 30 years of calendar time have produced 90 years of biological aging. This is extreme but not physically impossible under conditions of significant, sustained radiation exposure. It is the kind of thing you would expect to see in the person with the heaviest radiation exposure in a contamination zone. And here's the thing about Mole Man that never gets examined alongside his age. He does not work at the plant. He does not have any documented occupation that would explain unusually heavy exposure. He is simply a resident of Springfield, a civilian, a person who lives in the town and drinks its water and breathes its air and is subject to whatever the ambient contamination level in Springfield is for an ordinary resident with no special connection to the plant. And he is 31 years old and looks 90. If this is what Springfield's ambient contamination level does to an ordinary resident, what does direct occupational exposure do? What does decades of working inside the facility do? The show answers this question with Homer. Homer is the person who has spent the most time in closest proximity to the reactor core. Homer is the person whose cognitive impairment is most dramatic among the central characters. Homer is also the person whose physical resilience is most extraordinary, whose body absorbs damage that should be fatal and recovers from it with a speed that has no medical analog. Two sides of the same contamination. Molman aged at triple speed. Homer heals at impossible speed. The plant does different things to different people. What it does to Molman is make him ancient. What it does to Homer is make him indestructible. And what it does to Molman's relationship with death is perhaps the strangest thing of all. He dies and comes back. Not metaphorically, canonically. He dies in regular episodes and appears in subsequent episodes as if the death did not occur. The show has never addressed this as anything other than a running gag. He is killed, the credits roll, and next week he is there again. The radiation theory proposes that Molman's cellular biology has been altered in ways that prevent conventional death from sticking. Whatever the plant's contamination has done to his healing processes and his cellular repair mechanisms, it has produced a biology that can reconstitute itself even after what should be a fatal failure. Not quickly, Molman does not survive the fatal events in the moment they happen. He actually dies. But something in his cellular structure maintains the template of himself beyond the death event, and given sufficient time, reconstitutes. This would explain the gap between his deaths and his returns. He does not appear in the immediate aftermath of a fatal event. He appears episodes later, in contexts where some time has plausibly passed in Springfield. The reconstitution takes time, but it happens. If this is true, Molman is not the most unfortunate character in Springfield. He is the most remarkable. He is the first human being in the show's universe to have achieved, through the specific configuration of his mutation, something that Burns is spending enormous medical resources trying to approximate. Molman dies and comes back. Burns spends millions on weekly treatments to keep dying from happening in the first place. The goal is the same. The mechanism is entirely different. Burns's survival is expensive and maintained. Molman's is involuntary and automatic, which raises the question that the show will never address. Does Burns know about Molman? Is this the research Burns is actually funding? Is the pharmaceutical infrastructure that keeps Burns alive built on observations of what happens to an ordinary Springfield resident whose mutation crossed a specific biological threshold? The show does not say. But if Burns's scientists have been studying Springfield's population as a laboratory for decades, and the radiation theory implies that they have been, knowingly or not, then Molman represents the most interesting data point in the set. A 31-year-old man who looks 90 and cannot stay dead. And nobody in Springfield has ever thought to ask why. Now, Ned Flanders. The theological dimension of Ned's situation is the part the show handles most quietly and most devastatingly. God exists in Springfield. This is established canon, not as a belief, not as a metaphor, but as a fact within the show's internal reality. God has appeared. God has spoken. God has conveyed specific information to specific characters. The universe of The Simpsons is one in which the creator of everything is present, accessible, and communicative. And the person God chooses to communicate with is Homer Simpson. This is not incidental. The show returns to the Homer-God dynamic across multiple episodes and in multiple registers. Their conversations are not presented as hallucinations or as Homer's wishful thinking. They are presented as real. God is there. God talks to Homer. The conversations have content, have consequence, have the quality of genuine divine interaction. Ned Flanders has been in church every Sunday for 36 years. Ned Flanders has prayed with consistent, genuine, earnest faith for the entirety of his life in Springfield. Ned Flanders has organized his entire behavioral existence around a religious framework that posits a God who is present, who is attentive, who rewards the righteous and sustains the faithful. And God has never once spoken to Ned. The most devout man in Springfield gets silence. The least devout man in Springfield gets conversation. And the show does not present this as ironic or as a critique of organized religion. It presents it as a simple fact about God's relationship to the people of Springfield. God has a preference, and the preference is not for the people you would expect. Homer's relationship with God is casual, unearned, and continuous. He has meetings with God the way he has meetings with his neighbors accidentally, during the course of his ordinary life, without seeking them and without particularly appreciating them. God appears to Homer because Homer is the kind of person who stumbles into extraordinary experiences without effort. Ned seeks God with effort and intention and sustained devotion and receives nothing. The show is making a statement about something, but it is careful not to specify what. It is not saying that faith is wrong or that God is absent or that Ned's suffering is deserved. It is simply depicting, with the precision of observation rather than the loudness of argument, the specific configuration of divine attention in Springfield. And that configuration does not reward devotion. It rewards whatever it is that Homer has, which is not devotion. It is something more like a specific quality of open-handed, unself-conscious, fundamentally unreflective being in the world that has no agenda and no spiritual ambition and no theology and therefore, perhaps, no defenses against the divine either. Homer does not try to encounter God. God just shows up in Homer's house, on Homer's couch, in Homer's life. Because Homer, being too cognitively impaired and emotionally unguarded to maintain the kind of psychological architecture that keeps most people from having experiences like this, is simply more permeable to the universe than Ned is. Ned's faith is a structure, elaborate, disciplined, carefully maintained. God apparently does not enter through structures. God enters through gaps, and Homer is one large continuous gap. This does not make Ned wrong, or Homer right. It does not make faith pointless or casualness superior. It makes Springfield the kind of place where the usual rules about how things work do not apply, and where the rules that do apply are strange and not always legible and sometimes feel, when you follow them all the way down, like something that is laughing at you. Ned is not laughing. Ned has never been laughing. Ned is next door to the gap, watching. Section 12 extended. Let us end in the place the show always ends, which is also the place it always begins. The couch. The couch gag. The family running into the living room from different directions and landing on the couch in the specific configuration that announces, "This is The Simpsons. This is the show. The thing you are about to watch is this." The couch gag has been varying since the first season. Each version is different. Sometimes it is a quick joke, a single image, over in seconds. Sometimes it is an elaborate set piece, a full short film by a guest director, several minutes long, its own complete artistic statement nested inside the larger show. The couch gag has been directed by Banksy and Bill Plimpton and John Kricfalusi. It has gone to space, gone back in time, been performed in the style of other animated shows, been deconstructed and reconstructed and turned inside out, but it always ends the same way. The family is on the couch. Homer and Marge in the middle, Bart and Lisa on either side, Maggie on Marge's lap. The television is in front of them. They are watching. In every version of the couch gag, regardless of how elaborate the journey to get there, they arrive. They land, they are home. This is the show's deepest structural commitment. Whatever happens in the episode, whatever catastrophe, whatever adventure, whatever near miss with mortality or sanity or the physics of normal American life, the family ends up together. Not always happily, not always having resolved whatever the episode introduced, but together, in the house, in the configuration that is home. The floating timeline exists because the show is committed to this landing more than it is committed to any other thing. Bart cannot grow up and move out because if Bart grows up and moves out, There is no couch gag. Lisa cannot go to college because if Lisa goes to college, she is not on the couch. The family must remain in the configuration that allows them to keep arriving, keep landing, keep being together. The theories we have discussed all converge on this. The radiation keeps them mutated and impaired and in Springfield because Springfield is the contamination zone, and the contamination zone is where they live. The coma keeps them young because the coma is a loving parent's dream, and loving parents cannot imagine their children growing up without them. The collective denial keeps them in place because moving forward would require acknowledging what the place has done to them. Burns's system keeps them employed and dependent and unable to leave, because leaving would mean the system loses its optimal components. All roads lead to the couch. The show knows this. In its most self-aware moments, the episodes where it breaks its own fourth wall, the couch gags that acknowledge the cameras, the moments where a character looks directly at you, it is acknowledging a compact it has with its audience. We will always come back to this. This is the thing we do. You come here, and we are here, and the couch is here, and the family is on it. The compact has held for 36 years. It has held through seasons that fans loved, and seasons that fans did not, through cast changes and cultural shifts and the transformation of the television landscape around it. The show has outlasted the network television model that produced it, outlasted the critical consensus that declared it past its prime, outlasted the cultural moment it was originally made for. And the family is still on the couch. What does it mean to love a thing this long? What does it mean for a generation of people, actually multiple generations now, spanning the people who watched the premiere in 1989 and their children, and in some cases their children's children, to have organized a portion of their cultural life around a yellow family in a cartoon town that changes everything about itself except the configuration of the people? On the couch? I think it means that the couch is not a location. It is an idea. The idea is, there is a place where the people you love are always present, where the children are always at the age when they still need you, where the relationship is still in its form before the complicated negotiations of adult life change its shape, where the television is on and nobody is going anywhere and the beer, if you want one, is cold. This idea is a kind of paradise, not the paradise that religions promise, not a place of transcendent joy and perfect understanding, a small paradise. A couch paradise. The paradise of a house where the family is home on a Sunday evening and everyone is safe and nothing is required of you except to be there. Homer's coma dream is this paradise. Springfield's collective denial preserves this paradise by refusing to acknowledge the processes that would disrupt it. Burns's system maintains the conditions that keep this family in this house, in this town, on this couch, perpetually. And we, the audience, maintain it too. Every time we queue up an episode, every time we laugh at a joke from 1991, every time we feel the particular quality of comfort that the opening theme produces, that specific musical phrase that, after 36 years of association, carries more emotional freight than almost any other piece of music in American popular culture. We are choosing the couch. We are choosing the configuration. We are voting, every time we watch, for the version of the family where they are together and the children are young and the house looks the same and the loop continues. We are doing exactly what Springfield does when it votes to maintain the lie. Except our lie is gentler. Our lie is just, let them stay. Let them stay on the couch a little longer. Let the children be 10 and 8 and 1 for a little longer. Let Homer come through the door with the same energy he came through it with in 1989. Let Marge be patient and Bart be mischievous and Lisa be brilliant and Maggie be watching. Let the dream continue, because the dream is the point. The dream was always the point. Homer has been in his hospital bed since April 1993. If the theory is true, generating the most elaborate and sustained act of love in the history of American television. A comatose man keeping his family alive in the only medium available to him, doing it every week, never stopping, never letting the loop break. Or Homer has been going to work at the plant every day for 36 years, drinking the contaminated coffee, absorbing the ambient radiation, forgetting what happened last episode because the contamination ate the part of his brain that stores that kind of continuity, surviving impossible things because his mutated biology has made him nearly indestructible. Or Homer is a character in a cartoon, and none of this is real in the sense that real normally means. And we are a generation or two generations, or three of people who watched this cartoon and made it real in the only way anything is made real, which is by loving it long enough that it becomes part of the structure of your interior life, part of the furniture of who you are, part of the automatic associations that the specific sound of a theme song or the specific image of a yellow face can produce in you without effort, without thought, without any engagement beyond the simple recognition of something that has always been there. Springfield is in there. The plant and the couch and the crayon and the three-eyed fish and the billionaire who glows and the baby who knows. All of it is in there, arranged in the specific configuration your specific history with this show produced. That is the final mystery. That is the thing none of the theories quite reach, because none of them are looking in the right direction. The mystery is not what Springfield is doing to its residents. The mystery is what Springfield is doing to us. What we have built inside ourselves by watching. What the loop has made of the people who kept coming back to it for 36 years. That is a mystery the show will never solve, because it happens outside the show's jurisdiction. It happens in the space between the screen and the person watching it. And that space belongs to you, not to the writers or the animators or the production company or the theories. Whatever Springfield became for you, whatever it means when you hear that theme song, whatever feeling it produces in you that is different from the feeling any other piece of media produces, that is the final mystery. And it is yours. Good night, Springfield. Good night, Homer. Good night to the house on Evergreen Terrace and the plant at the edge of town and the fish with 3 eyes and the baby watching everything and the man in the hospital bed who has been dreaming for 30 years. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. Sleep well. It will all be here when you come back. It always is. End of script. Fall asleep to all Springfield's secrets. Interlude, the show that watches back. There is a quality to spending a long time with The Simpsons that other long-running shows do not produce in quite the same way. Most television, even very good television, maintains a certain distance between itself and its audience. The show is the show. You are the viewer. The separation is structural and maintained throughout. You enter the show's world for the duration of the episode, and when the episode ends, you return to yours, and the border between the two is clear. The Simpsons has gradually, over 36 years, dissolved that border. This is partly a function of duration. When you have been watching the same family for longer than you have been alive, or for the majority of your life, or for a period of time that encompasses multiple distinct phases of your own personal history, the family stops feeling like characters and starts feeling like something else. Not real exactly, but not fully fictional either. They inhabit some third space between those categories. A space that is uniquely productive for a show built around the specific theories we have been discussing. Because the theories we have been discussing are not really about the show. They are about what the show represents, about what Springfield stands for in the cultural and psychological life of the people who have watched it. The radiation theory is about power and its concealment and the specific damage done to people who live in the shadow of systems built to exploit them. The coma theory is about love and loss, and the particular human capacity for keeping the things you love alive in your mind long after the circumstances of your life have changed. The collective denial theory is about communities and the price of comfortable lies. The Burns immortality theory is about wealth and what it does to the relationship between a very rich man and the people who depend on him. Maggie's silence is about intelligence and strategy in a world that punishes visibility. The predictions are about pattern recognition and the cultural function of satire. Mona's story is about what political courage costs, in personal terms, across generations. Springfield's geography is about universality and accountability and the specific ways that being everywhere means being nowhere in particular. These are not cartoon problems. These are human problems. They are the problems that every generation encounters in some form, under different names, in different contexts, with different specific details. The Simpsons puts them in Springfield and gives them yellow faces and makes them funny. And in making them funny, it makes them legible in a way that direct address might not. Comedy is one of the oldest technologies for saying true things. Satire is how communities talk to themselves about the things they have not yet worked out how to say directly. It creates enough distance enough that is not us, that is those fictional people in that fictional town, to allow the truth to be heard without triggering the defenses that the truth, stated plainly, would produce. Springfield is the distance the Simpsons creates between you and the things it wants to say to you. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the cartoon proportions and the impossible geography are not just art style. They are the necessary distancing that allows the show to talk about nuclear power and class and political corruption and the specific damage that absent parents do to their children and the way communities maintain comfortable fictions without those conversations feeling like accusations. Because they are accusations. The show is accusing something, or accusing a set of somethings. Across 36 years of jokes, it is accusing power of what power does. It is accusing wealth of what wealth does. It is accusing communities of what communities do. It is accusing the specific configuration of American working-class life in the late 20th and early 21st centuries of what that configuration does to the people who live inside it. And it does all of this while being genuinely, consistently, generously funny, while loving its characters with the specific warmth that the show's best writing has always maintained, while finding in the Simpson family, in all their yellow, imperfect, damaged limitation, something worth protecting, something worth returning to, something that, after 36 years, still has the capacity to make you feel like you are home. This is the show's deepest trick. It says hard things in a gentle way. And the gentleness is not a betrayal of the hardness. The gentleness is what allows the hardness to get in. Homer is not a victim. He is not a tragedy. He is a man who loves his family and works hard and makes an extraordinary number of mistakes and keeps getting back up, and the show loves him for all of it. The radiation that may have impaired his cognition, the coma that may have taken him from his family, the conspiracy that may have structured his entire adult life around the interests of the man who destroyed his family, none of this makes Homer pitiable. It makes him human. It makes him us. It makes him the person we recognize in ourselves when we are at our most tired and most imperfect and most in need of someone to see us anyway. Marge sees him. The show sees him. And we see him, and we come back every week, and that seeing is the thing the show is actually about underneath everything else. All the mysteries, all the theories, all the buried storylines and the unresolved questions, and the gaps in the official record. They are all in service of a question the show asks in every episode, in every season, across the whole impossible span of its existence. What does it mean to love imperfect people in an imperfect world? And the answer the show gives, every week, in every reset and every couch landing, and every moment where Homer looks at his family and they look back at him, is the same. It means you do it anyway. It means you do it every week. It means you come back. The timeline in full, what 36 years actually looks like. Let us map it just once. The 36 years of the floating timeline, laid flat, so you can see the shape of what the show has done. The show premieres. Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s. Their background is in the 1970s, which is the decade that makes sense for people their age in 1989. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1. Springfield is a specific version of American working-class suburban life, and that specificity is the show's primary tool. The show is at its creative peak by most critical accounts. The jokes are tighter, the emotional observations more precise, the satire more sharply targeted. Homer and Marge's relationship is treated with genuine depth. Bart and Lisa are allowed to be genuinely complex children rather than simply comedic types. April. Homer enters the coma. The show crosses whatever line exists between its grounded early seasons and its increasingly surreal later ones. Whether you attribute this to the coma theory, to creative evolution, to the specific changes in the writing staff that occurred around this period, or simply to the natural trajectory of a show that has to keep generating novelty in its 7th year, the shift is real and documented and felt by anyone who watches the show with attention. The shooting of Mr. Burns. The Summer Mystery, the cultural event that demonstrated what The Simpsons had become by its 6th season, something large enough to be a national conversation rather than simply a television program. The show had become, by this point, the reference point for American animation and American primetime satire. It had won the Emmys and launched careers and changed what people thought animated television could do. And it used this cultural capital to pull off the most ambitious narrative stunt in animated television history, a serialized mystery with national audience participation. The Principal and the Pauper. The episode that the audience decided was the betrayal, which, as we have discussed, may be the most honest thing the show has ever done. The Simpsons movie. 18 years into the show's run, a feature film. The movie that managed to generate the cultural energy of an event for a show that by 2007 many critics had declared past its prime. The Dome. The EPA. Springfield's contamination given its most explicit, most federal acknowledgement within the show's canon. The Longest Daycare. Maggie's Academy Award-nominated short. The show generating prestige in a different direction, using the feature film theatrical format to tell Maggie's story, the closest it has come to exploring what Maggie actually is, with no dialogue and a 7-minute runtime. 2019 onward. The show continues. Season 30, Season 31, Season 32. The renewal announcements come and the show keeps going, and Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8, and the plant is still running, and Burns is still in his office. Cypress Hill performs with the London Symphony Orchestra. 28 years after The Simpsons joke, the prediction phenomenon resurfaces for the 100th time. The show is in its 37th season, 788 episodes and counting. No end has been announced. The loop continues its float. This timeline does not tell you when the show peaked, or when it changed, or which seasons are worth watching and which are not. It tells you something simpler. The show has been running for longer than most human relationships last, longer than most careers, longer than most institutions that are not governments or religions. It has outlasted the cultural moment that produced it, and the critical consensus that defined it, and the network television model that distributed it. It is still running. The family is still on the couch, and all the mysteries we have discussed tonight, every theory, every buried thread, every unresolved question exist inside that durability. They are the sediment of 36 years of storytelling, the accumulated weight of nearly 800 episodes of a family navigating a world that was always slightly wrong in ways the show never quite articulated directly. The wrongness is the point. Springfield has always been slightly wrong. The fish have always had 3 eyes. The plant has always been leaking. Burns has always been too old. The children have always been too young. The town has always forgotten what happened last week. And we have always come back. Because the wrongness of Springfield is the wrongness we recognize. Not in cartoon form, not in yellow skin and 4 fingers, but in the specific shape of the world we actually live in, where power does what power does, and wealth protects itself, and communities choose comfortable stories, and the people at the bottom work harder than the people at the top, and the children grow up in the shadow of things their parents cannot fix, and still, somehow, the family manages to be on the couch on Sunday night, together, watching television, and for the duration of that couch time, something that resembles peace is available. That is what Springfield is. That is what all of this is. And now, if you have been awake for this whole journey through Springfield's secrets, you have done something remarkable. You have followed 36 years of mysteries through their full complexity without looking away. You have sat with the radiation and the coma, and the shooting, and the immortal billionaire, and the silent genius baby, and the fugitive mother, and the imposter principal, and the tiny unkillable man, and the devout man who gets nothing, the drunk who gets God. You have stayed in Springfield for the whole of it. Welcome home. Sleep well. The episodes that contain everything. There are certain episodes of The Simpsons that are not just episodes. They are load-bearing walls. They are the structural members that hold the entire edifice of Springfield's mythology together. And if you were going to build a reading list for someone who wanted to understand everything we have discussed tonight, these are the episodes you would give them. Not because they are the funniest or the most critically acclaimed, though several of them are both, but because they are the most honest. The episodes where the show looked at what it was doing and said it plainly, in the language of comedy and cartoon, and trusted the audience to hear the thing underneath the joke. Homer the Heretic from Season 4 is the episode that puts the God conversation on record 6 months before the coma. Homer decides to stop going to church and stay home on Sunday mornings instead. He makes breakfast, he watches television, he has the best day of his life. And then God appears to him in the house, and they have a conversation that the show presents with complete, unironic sincerity. God and Homer discuss faith and its purpose and what Homer is missing by staying home. God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. That his time is coming. The episode is primarily a comedy about religious observance and personal faith, and the specific texture of Homer's relationship to institutional religion, which is that of a man who loves God in his idiosyncratic way and finds organized church attendance insufficient to that love. But the conversation with God is real within the episode. It happened. God said those words, and 6 months later, the vending machine fell. Homer, the heretic, is the coma theory's prologue, and Bart sells his soul from season 7 is the episode that does something the show rarely does. It takes seriously the question of what a soul is and what it costs to lose one. Bart, in a dispute with Milhouse, sells his soul for $5. He gives Milhouse a piece of paper on which he has written Bart Simpson's soul and takes the money. Then things start going wrong in ways that are subtle enough to be attributable to ordinary bad luck, but specific enough to suggest something has genuinely changed. Dogs do not come to Bart when he calls them. Machines do not respond to him the way they respond to others. Automatic doors do not open for him. His sister's automatic fish tank will not let him feed the fish. He is, in a quiet and accumulating way, slightly out of sync with the world. Slightly less recognized by the systems and creatures around him than he was before. Bart concludes that the soul is real and that selling it was a mistake. He tries to buy it back, which takes him through an odyssey that ends with Lisa having secretly purchased the soul paper from Milhouse and returned it to Bart not because she believed him, but because she loves him and could not watch him suffer for something she could fix. The episode is funny, but its emotional undertow is serious. The show is taking seriously the idea that there is something real at stake in questions of spiritual integrity, that Bart's transaction had genuine consequences, not metaphorical ones in the world of the show, and that the resolution Lisa's quiet, unsentimental act of love is possible because of the specific quality of Lisa's attention to her brother. She sees him. She sees that he is suffering. She fixes it without fanfare and goes back to her room. This is the episode that explains why Lisa is the one character the show will not let be destroyed by Springfield. Bart sells his soul, and Lisa buys it back. The transaction between them is the transaction of siblings who love each other in the specific way that is only possible between people who know each other completely and accept each other anyway. And Lisa's Wedding, from season 6, is the episode that does the cruelest and most loving thing the show has ever done. It shows you the future. A fortune teller at a Renaissance fair shows Lisa a vision of her adult life. She is 23. She is in London. She is engaged to a man who is kind and intelligent and loves her. She is the person she always seemed like she would become, still fighting, still a little lonely, still slightly at odds with the world's resistance to her particular kind of intelligence, but alive, still going, still playing her saxophone, still calling her family, even though the family is still the family, and then she calls off the engagement. Not because the man is wrong, because he cannot accept her family. And the family, despite everything, despite Homer's embarrassments and the specific weight of growing up in Springfield, is not something Lisa can ask someone to merely tolerate. It is something they have to be willing to love, which means being willing to love Homer, which means being willing to love imperfection fully and not just when it is convenient. Lisa chooses her family over a future that would have required her to be slightly ashamed of them. And then she goes back to being 8 years old. The flash forward closes, the permanent present resumes, and you are left sitting with the specific knowledge that the show just showed you who Lisa becomes, and then put her back, sealed the future behind glass, returned her to her 8-year-old self, and the show continues as if the glimpse did not occur. The cruelty is that we know. We have seen it. We know Lisa grows up and goes to England and falls in love and has the full, complicated adult life that the show will never depict continuously. We know it is possible, and the show will not give it to us. It will give us glimpses in this episode, in others, and then take them back and return us to the permanent present where Lisa is 8 and brilliant and lonely and still has everything ahead of her. Every flash forward the show has produced is both a gift and a theft. It gives you the future and then takes it away. It shows you that the characters could age, could grow, could become, and then declines to let them. And we keep watching. We accept the theft. We accept the return to the permanent present. We go back to 8 and 10 and 1 and mid-30s, and we watch the family be the family and the couch be the couch and the town be the town. Because the permanent present for all its strangeness and all its impossibility and all the mysteries it contains, is where we have chosen to live. Not in the flash forward. Not in the future where Lisa is 23 in London, and Bart has grown into whatever he grows into, and Maggie has finally spoken, and Homer has woken up, or not. Here, in the permanent present, in Springfield. In the house on Evergreen Terrace, where the television is on, and the family is assembled, and nothing is required of you except to be here too, watching. The episodes that contain everything are the episodes that let you be here, not that tell you stories about a fictional family. That make you feel, for the duration of their runtime, that you are part of something continuous and warm and slightly impossible and completely real in the ways that matter. That is what the best episodes do. And the best episodes of The Simpsons do it at a level that very few other things in the history of American popular culture have matched. 36 years. 788 episodes. Every theory in this video. Every mystery, every buried thread, every question that the show has raised and declined to answer, every detail hiding in plain sight behind decades of jokes and callbacks, and the particular yellow of a family that does not age. All of it exists to produce this feeling. The feeling of being somewhere that will still be here when you come back, where the family is intact, where the couch is warm, where the loop continues and the theme plays and Bart skateboards down the street and Homer drives past his street and U-turns and Marge and the kids and the dog arrive in the car and they all race to the couch and land and the television comes on. And you are there too, watching. Part of the loop, part of the family, part of Springfield. You have been here for 2 hours tonight, and for however long you have been watching the show, which for some of you is most of your life. You know this place. You have always known it. And no matter how clearly you can see the radiation and the coma and the lies and the billionaire and the system and the mysteries, no matter how precisely you can articulate every strange and troubling thing that Springfield has been doing for 36 years, you still feel what you feel when the theme plays. You are home. Thank you for being here. Sleep well, wherever you are, and subscribe if you want to come back. We will be here. Springfield always is. The end. Fall asleep to all Springfield secrets. Total runtime. Approximately 3.54 hours of narration. A note on tone for the voiceover artist. This script is written to be read slowly. Not laboriously, not with the heavy gravity of a documentary about something terrible. Slowly in the way a good story told late at night is slow, with room inside each sentence for the listener's mind to move around, to make connections, to arrive at places slightly before or slightly after the words do, which is where the resonance lives. Springfield rewards patience. The theories we have discussed tonight all have a quality of slow accumulation. They are built from details that do not seem significant individually and only reveal their pattern when you have enough of them together. The narration should honor this. It should trust the listener to follow without being pushed. It should move at the pace of someone who has been to Springfield many times and knows it well enough to stop and look at things rather than simply listing them. The emotional register is warm but not sentimental. There is sadness in some of what we have discussed: Homer's stolen mother, Ned's unanswered prayers, the real Seymour Skinner tied to a train, the comatose man dreaming about his family. The sadness should be present, but it should not be performed. It should be the sadness of someone who has looked at these things clearly and felt what they feel without being overwhelmed by it. This is a show about a family. Whatever else it is: satire, mystery, cultural mirror, love letter, contamination zone, coma dream, it is primarily about a family. And families are strange and sad and funny and ongoing, and the narration should hold all of those qualities at once. The listener is probably in bed, or close to it. They have chosen to spend this time in Springfield, which is a choice that says something about what Springfield means to them. Treat that choice with respect. Do not rush past the things that matter. Do not speed through the emotional moments to get to the next theory. Stay with things long enough for them to land. Springfield has been here for 36 years. It will be here tomorrow. There is no hurry. Read as if you have all night. Because if the theories are right, if Homer is still in that hospital bed dreaming about his family, then he has all night too. He has all the nights. He has been dreaming for 30 years, and he will keep dreaming as long as the dream keeps running and the family stays on the couch and nobody turns off the television. Let the dream run. Let Springfield be. And let the listener drift, if they want to drift, on the current of it. Good night. Appendix. The questions Springfield will never answer. A short list for those who want to keep pulling threads after tonight. Why are there human skeletons in the basement of the nuclear plant, and who were those people? How did a crayon become lodged in Homer's brain during his childhood without a single medical professional in Springfield identifying it? What was the specific crime that Grandpa Simpson discovered that gave him leverage over Burns sufficient to purchase Homer's lifetime employment guarantee? What is in the biological weapons laboratory that Mona's group destroyed? Or, more precisely, what was it designed to produce and for whom? If Burns has been conducting his weekly radiation treatments at a facility near Springfield for decades, who runs that facility, and who are the medical staff who understand the treatment protocol well enough to administer it? What is Maggie waiting for? Where is the real Seymour Skinner now? What did God mean when he told Homer his time was coming? And does the fact that Homer subsequently entered a coma constitute a fulfillment of that prophecy? If the town's amnesia about previous catastrophes is a choice rather than a symptom, if Springfield has been actively voting to forget, as the principal and the pauper implies, who organizes the votes? Is it spontaneous collective consensus? Or is there a mechanism? And if there is a mechanism, who built it? These questions have no official answers. The show has not addressed them, and almost certainly will not. They are the threads that the theories pull but do not resolve, the gaps in the official record that invite speculation without providing confirmation. Springfield is full of these gaps. That is the point. A town without gaps is a town without mystery. And a town without mystery is just a town. Springfield is more than just a town. It is the space where the unsaid lives, where the implications of 36 years of comedy accumulate into something that rewards the kind of attention that most television does not. Bring the attention. The gaps will meet you there. Good night. Springfield is still here. It always will be. The sun is out somewhere over Springfield. Or it is blocked. It depends on the episode. It has been both across 36 seasons, and it will be both again. The three-eyed fish is still in the river. The crayon is still in Homer's brain, or it is not, depending on which episode you are in, and whether the Season 12 removal has been reset by the floating timeline. Maggie's pacifier is still in her mouth and her eyes are still watching, and whatever she knows she is keeping, for now, for the moment she decides the moment is right. Burns is in his office behind his enormous desk with the release mechanism for the trapdoor, which he uses more often than you would expect given the frequency with which visitors do not fall through it. Ned is next door. The church is down the street. The plant is at the edge of town, its towers breathing into the sky, its violations continuing, its radiation making its way through the watershed and into the taps and into the coffee. Homer is drinking at his workstation while the warning lights blink. Everything is as it has always been. Everything will be as it has always been tomorrow. The loop holds, the dream runs, the family is on the couch. And wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, in whatever corner of the world you occupy, Springfield is available to you. It has always been available. It will always be available. That is the one promise the show has kept without interruption across its entire extraordinary life. You can always go home to Evergreen Terrace. The door is always open. The couch is always there. Come home whenever you need to. Come home now if you like. You are already here.